Chapter 414. Desire Apostle. While Stuart was raising his gun to aim, Klein, who had long been on guard, had already detected it. He lunged forward at the same time as Stuart performed his series of actions. Bang! Stuart, who was clearly out of control, pulled the trigger, and the bullet grazed the side of a private detective's face as it hit the wall. Instantly, the other detectives pulled out their revolvers as a result of the stress. It was as if they were looking at the enemy, turning the scene extremely chaotic. Among them, Stuart and a private detective had flushed faces and bulging veins. Their eyes burned with a mixture of fear and anger, as though they had turned into so-called devils. At this moment, Kaslana bellowed, "Stop!" Her voice wasn't loud, but it was filled with awe. It made everyone's body tremble, and they subconsciously complied. Although there was a brief moment of silence, everyone's mood didn't seem to improve. Klein had already rolled over to the other side and stood up with his revolver in his hand. His mind raced, and he couldn't afford to hide his thoughts. He planned to rely on his hallucination ability to calm down the few visitors. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Ding dong, ding dong. A few of the private detectives suddenly became alert, and their eyes revealed a hint of lucidity. The tinkling of the doorbell was like a bucket of cold water that poured over their heads. Stuart looked at the revolver in his hand and mumbled in a daze, "What was I doing just now? The official Beyonders have made their move?" Klein breathed a sigh of relief, approaching the door as he held his revolver. The moment he held the handle, the image of the person outside appeared in his mind. It was a man in a black coat and a hunter's hat. He had gray temples and a thin face, Isengard Stanton. The detective's face was somewhat pale, and his left arm was propped up near the shoulder. "He really is all right." Klein was delighted at first, but then he became cautious. He remembered the day when nimble right Master Rosago had transformed into a constable to knock at his door. Klein placed his finger on the trigger, pulled the door open, and took 2 steps back. Isengard Stanton smiled and nodded at him. "Thank you for your visit this afternoon. Otherwise, I might not have been able to continue playing hide-and-seek with that devil. You saved my life." This. Could it be that the correct interpretation of a suitable date for visiting Isengard Stanton is that by visiting him this afternoon, I was able to help him out of trouble? What about the next few days of suitable dates for visiting? By skirting around the murder scene, I wouldn't be suspected? Klein didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He didn't let his guard down as he made way. What exactly happened? We'll talk later. Isengard suddenly lowered his voice and laughed. Do you wish to discuss the subject of Beyonders in front of Stuart and the others? So here you are mentioning Beyonders to me so naturally? That's right, I was able to remain in a deadlock with the master of the Devil Dog for more than 10 minutes. That serves to prove that I'm no ordinary person. Besides, the suggestion I previously offered pointed straight at a devil-turned animal. Klein quietly stayed behind Isengard Stanton by 2 steps. Upon seeing this great detective, Kaslana and her assistant Lydia let out a sigh of relief. Stuart and the other private detectives also showed a look of relief. "Are you all right, Mr. Stanton?" they asked. Isengard slightly moved his left arm and said, "A little injured, but not too badly." "Okay. Everyone, don't be nervous. This will be over soon. The police are waiting for that bastard in the darkness nearby. Is it because of the serial murders? Have you locked onto the suspect? Will he hurt the innocent?" The private detectives asked frantically. Isengard pressed his right palm down. "Don't worry, I'll tell you in detail in the time to come, but before that, I need to find out a few things from Sherlock and Kaslana. We'll head to the activity room for a few minutes." His accumulated prestige made the detectives sit down without rebutting. Although they were still worried, they no longer had the problem of fretting or suddenly losing control of their emotions. After entering the activity room and closing the wooden door, Klein took a look at the enclosed room and suddenly thought of something. This kind of environment is very suitable for using items like the biological poison bottle. Ahem. Klein cleared his throat, walked across the room, and opened the window. He still didn't relax his wariness against Isengard Stanton, nor did he believe that Kaslana was absolutely trustworthy. Isengard looked around, directly taking Klein's reclining chair before chuckling. "Being old, I still like to sit like this." Sitting on a single sofa, Klein asked again, "Mr. Stanton, what exactly happened?" Isengard looked at Kaslana, who was standing behind a coffee table, and said, We're all Beyonders, so I won't explain stuff pertaining to general knowledge. Beyonders. Kaslana first looked at Klein, then at Isengard, slightly surprised but not all that shocked. So it turns out that you're also a Beyonder. Why were you stumped by a weak ghost back then and unable to even discover the problem? Yes, perhaps she's from a sequence that isn't good at dealing with shadows or wraiths. Klein responded to her gaze. Isengard smiled and said, I once went to the Lenberg for 4 years of studies, where I came into contact with the Beyonder world and became a believer of the god of knowledge and wisdom. After returning to Backlund, I gradually established a good relationship with the military, the Church of the Evernight Goddess, and the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery, but I didn't dare to reveal my true identity, because the mandated punishers would definitely eliminate me as a cult's heretic. On this matter, the other official organizations wouldn't help me directly, because that would be equivalent to starting a war with the Church of the Lord of Storms. As expected of the Tyrant's Church. Tyrant? Klein asked in passing. Isengard took out his pipe, but only sniffed the tobacco. This is what our church internally calls the Lord of the Storms. All right. Let me first return to what happened today. The person who attacked me and delivered threatening letters to you is the master of the serial murderer from before. Heh. You should know that the murderer is a black dog of the devil sequence, especially Sherlock. You were the first to point out that the devil might be an animal. Klein smiled, neither denying nor admitting it. Kaslana also just clasped her hands together, not saying a word. Isengard shook his head and laughed. Don't worry, I'm not an enforcer, but as a believer of the god of knowledge and wisdom, I can't preach in Backlund or officially establish an organization. I can only rely on you and others like you for help. In other words, you can help us take the blame? Klein mocked inwardly. Isengard continued, seeing that they were still not making any admission. The Devil Dog's master is a Sequence 5 expert. Yes, according to what I know, the Devil Pathways Sequence 5 is Desire Apostle. They can use and control everyone's emotions and desires, enticing them to be corrupted. When facing a Desire Apostle, one mustn't have feelings that are too intense. One mustn't make or exhibit overt desires. Otherwise, they'll immediately be remotely controlled by him. Otherwise, a seed might be planted in them or have it catalyze immediately. This will make people exhibit many problems as they gradually become corrupted. They might also lose control of their emotions at a critical moment and be unable to put up any resistance. This is a portion of the Beyonder powers a Desire Apostle has. I have confirmed these aspects from my battle with him. Upon hearing this, Klein suddenly understood one of the reasons why the culprit had sent out threatening letters and made such provocative actions. He wanted to anger us, making our emotions experience violent changes so that he could bury a corruption seed or catalyze our emotions, making it erupt out of control. This would make his follow-up attack simpler and easier. Fortunately, I'm a Beyonder who has experienced many things. At that time, all I had was vigilance and caution. When Stuart and the others saw the threatening letter, their emotions clearly changed, so the Desire Apostle had planted a seed in them. If we hadn't been able to stabilize them in time, the situation would have become chaotic with the internal strife, giving the surrounding official Beyonders little time to react, and thus, giving the Desire Apostle ample opportunity. Back when I was in Isengard Stanton's house, I felt that time moved slowly. Was it a result of the magnification of my sudden increase in vigilance, tension, wariness and other emotions? Klein thought back and felt lucky. So that's how it is. Kaslana seemed to gain an understanding of many things. Isengard rubbed his temples and said, I was almost manipulated by him, which resulted in my injuries. Afterward, I used a mystical item to play hide and seek in the house. It was only when Sherlock visited and the three sides came to a stalemate did I get a chance to have a breather. My poor assistant was looking forward to returning to Lenberg for Mass on New Year's Day. At this point he sighed. When the police arrived, I took the opportunity to escape and then used the river to escape the pursuit, Isengard added. He then asked, Sherlock Kaslana, how do you plan on handling this issue? After a moment of silence, Kaslana said, Mr. Stanton, do you have any suggestions? Isengard said, First, take the protection of the official Beyonders, preventing the Desire Apostle from daring to take action. While this is happening, we should hope that he's quickly caught or killed. If our hopes aren't met, it's impossible that the official Beyonders would allocate people to constantly protect us. Then, we only have two choices. First, it's to change our identity, including our families, and move to a different place with their help. However, no one can guarantee that the Desire Apostle won't discover this. Second, we can directly join a corresponding official organization and become an external member. That way, our identity and place of residence will change as well, but it's much safer. Join a corresponding official organization? The machinery hive mind? Or go to places like Lemberg or Mason to join the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom? Wouldn't I then come to have 3 last names? No, a believer of 3 churches? Klein felt an inexplicable sense of absurdity. He thoughtfully asked for advice. Are there no other solutions? At the same time, there was no change in Kaslana's expression. It was unknown what she was thinking. Isengard Stanton rubbed his pipe and said, "Yes, that is that we join forces to create an opportunity so that we can quickly find and detain the Desire Apostle. Of course, the perfect outcome would be us killing him directly." Chapter 4:15. The ring. Klein didn't have too big of a response in regards to Isengard Stanton's suggestion. He looked at the tightly closed door of the activity room and said, "As far as I know, a devil can predict danger before we take action, and they can even determine the source of the danger, thus providing an effective response. It's hard to find and restrain him." Isengard nodded slightly and said, "Yes, that's indeed the case, but this doesn't mean that there are no solutions." "What solutions?" Kaslana immediately asked. Isengard smiled and said, "I fought him head-on and witnessed his beyonder powers of predicting danger, so I have a rough idea of its strengths and weaknesses. A devil can indeed detect danger before it happens, and it can be done so for quite a significant period of time prior to the danger. As long as we make any plans and take decisive action that targets him, he would receive the corresponding premonition. Of course, it has to be something that can really harm him. No, the truth is that the strengths and weaknesses of different types of devils are different. Some of them might only be capable of detecting danger 10 to 20 minutes in advance." Klein silently retorted, but he didn't say it out loud. Isengard continued, "The flaw of premonition powers is that it can only detect the person and location of the danger, but it doesn't know the specific details. This gives us an opportunity to take advantage of it." "What opportunity?" "I don't think we can trap a devil that can predict danger," Kaslana asked incredulously. Klein also nodded in agreement. "Of course, I can use the gray fog to deceive the Desire Apostle, making him unable to detect danger ahead of time. But the problem is, how can I expose the secret of the gray fog in front of others?" Klein silently added a few words. Isengard chuckled. "It's true that it won't work normally, but the Beyonder world is full of incredible things. I'm a Sequence 7 knowledge keeper of the reader pathway, also known as detective. By honestly telling you this, it's a way of showing my sincerity in cooperating. In this situation, I think honesty is more important than anything else." "Only Sequence 7? How could a Sequence 7 escape from a Desire Apostle? It seems like Mr. Stanton has a powerful mystical item." Enlightened, Klein shifted in his seat. "Does a knowledge keeper have the ability to suppress a devil's premonition powers?" Kaslana asked with her body leaning forward. "No," Isengard said with a laugh. "However, I have a ring. It originates from a Sequence 6 rampager of the reader pathway. It allows me to differentiate, recognize, remember, and mimic all the Beyonder powers I've seen before. Of course, against more powerful Beyonder powers, the chance of failure is higher. Haha, there is a maxim in our church. Omniscience means omnipotence. Why does it sound so familiar? Furthermore, the description of the item." Klein was about to run through his memories when he saw Isengard Stanton take out a gorgeous ring. The ring was inlaid with many small diamonds. Together, they surrounded a beautiful emerald green gem that looked like a human eye. Just by looking at this ring, Klein felt dizzy, as if he had overworked his mind. Isn't this sealed artifact 2-081? Isengard Stanton is old Mr. Eye of Wisdom? Klein looked up in surprise at the detective sitting in the reclining chair. That ring was the sealed artifact 2-081 which Eye of Wisdom had flaunted to him previously and had used several times in the Beyonder gathering. Eye of Wisdom. This code name does sound like it's related to the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. Klein, using his clown's ability to control his expression as he looked quietly at Isengard Stanton. In the end, he found that some of the outlines of the great detective did match Eye of Wisdom, but there were many details which were highly different. His ability to disguise himself is very impressive. Was it done with the help of 2-081? Klein made a rough judgment. At this moment, he suddenly thought of a scene. If Mr. Stanton says, "Let all of us work together to resist the Desire Apostle, and the most important thing is honesty." I have already described my sequence and mystical item. It's your turn. What should I say? Silently take out the sun brooch which he sold to me? At that moment wouldn't he be going, "Nice, so it's you, punk." While Klein was imagining things, Kaslana looked at the ring Isengard Stanton showed and asked in envy and puzzlement, "What power are you planning on mimicking to resist the Desire Apostle's ability to predict danger?" Isengard curled the corner of his lips and chuckled. The premonition that devils have towards danger. At that moment, he looked like a hoary fox. That actually works? Klein was instantly momentarily unable to figure out the intricacies. Seeing Kaslana and Klein puzzled, Isengard laughed and explained, "First, which is what we're currently doing, draw up a plan that can actually harm the Desire Apostle and begin working on it. Second, the Desire Apostle will sense the danger and know that the danger comes from us and that it stems from this place. Third, as a devil without any advanced preparations, there are certain things that are instinctual to him that he cannot change. His first reaction is definitely to kill us or to exact revenge on us, and there will be certain changes to his body, after which he will consider whether the current situation is suitable for a counterattack or not, and whether he should choose to stay away from us. Fourth, by mimicking the devil's premonition powers, I'll sense the threat of the Desire Apostle and grasp the source of danger, which is also his present location." That's some godly operation. Klein was quite surprised. But what happens next? The Desire Apostle would run away as soon as he realizes that something is wrong. We won't even have time to chase after him. Doubts immediately arose in him. Isengard looked at the two of them and smiled. According to my deductions, he must be hiding in our surroundings right now. No matter how good he is at remotely controlling the emotions of others, there must be a distance limit. And just now, he had led Stuart and the others to lose control of their emotions. After I escaped his pursuit, the reason why it took me so long to appear here was because I was discussing a plan with the Nighthawks, Machinery Hive Mind, and the military. They will each send 2 to 3 squads who are in charge of monitoring the nearby districts. These districts all have their code names. Heh. This will all be within the Desire Apostle's expectations. Even if he senses the danger, he will only treat it as normal. As soon as I confirm his location, I will inform the official Beyonders, and they will rapidly seal off the corresponding areas and close in on him. But herein lies the problem. How are we to inform the official Beyonders? If we're unable to accomplish this within seconds, the Desire Apostle will escape. Of course, he might have fled when what he just did had failed, Klein said in thought. If that's the case, we would be out of solutions as well. There's no plan that's absolutely perfect. We can only wait for a particular sealed artifact's activation process to complete. When the time comes, the Desire Apostle might have already left Backlund, but he might return at any time, Isengard explained. He then took out a golden palm-sized item. It looked like a miniature telegraph, but it also had a trumpet on it. This is a sealed artifact. It can allow my voice to sound out simultaneously up to a range of 5 kilometers, Isengard smiled as he introduced it. Its negative effect is that once it's activated, all sounds within 5 kilometers will be transmitted to the user's ears for an extended period of time. Of course, I can mimic a Beyonder power to mitigate this effect. After listening carefully, Kaslana frowned slightly. Since there are official Beyonders involved, there doesn't seem to be any need for our cooperation? Isengard carefully put on sealed artifact 2-081 and earnestly said, "In order to not alarm the Desire Apostle ahead of time, there's a void of power in the nearby district. If the target is really here, the 3 of us need to help each other to retain him as best as we can." "I have no problem." Klein pondered for a moment before agreeing. Kaslana also nodded and said, "Mr. Stanton, there's no need for you to explain so much. After all, we'll cooperate for our own sake." "Haha, an explanation is part of the plan, and an agreement means that the operation is about to begin." Isengard half closed his eyes. The emerald green gem on the ring of his right hand began to glow with a dark blue light. Suddenly, Isengard Stanton stood up, pointing upwards with a grim expression. "He's right here upstairs." Klein and Kaslana stood up at the same time, one ready to snap a finger and light a match on the second floor to jump up there directly. while the other followed Isengard towards the door. None of them expected the Desire Apostle to be so bold as to remain in the vicinity after the failure of the previous machination, right in 15 Minsk Street. Maybe he was upstairs watching it all with a cold gaze while we were discussing the plan to deal with him. This thought suddenly popped up in Klein's mind. At that moment, he saw Kaslana's eyes suddenly turn red, and her right hand formed a fist as she punched out at Isengard Stanton's back where his heart was. This. Klein's pupils contracted as he instantly came to a realization of many things. The reason why the Desire Apostle didn't flee was because he still had other plans set up. He still had a seed of corruption in someone's heart that he didn't catalyze. That person was none other than Kaslana, one of the only 3 Beyonders here. The reason why the unsuccessful attempt at instigating them was so easily resolved was to let their guard down and wait for the critical moment to make Kaslana lose control of her emotions. The Desire Apostle's biggest target was still Isengard Stanton. How crafty! Klein snapped his fingers, but it was only an air bullet that was fired at Kaslana. At the same time he shouted, "Be careful!" Isengard had a lot of experience too. He didn't care what the situation was as he threw himself forward. However, Kaslana ignored the bullet, allowing it to strike her arm and allowing blood to splatter everywhere. Bam! She punched Isengard in the back, throwing her entire body forward. Kacha! Klein heard the sound of bones breaking, and the point of contact was the spine. Chapter 4:16. 2 rights make a wrong. Kacha. When Klein saw Isengard Stanton's back cave in, even he felt a faint pain in his spine. Isengard fell to the ground with a thud, seemingly instantly losing consciousness from the pain. Kaslana, on the other hand, stood in her original spot, gasping for breath with a blank look in her eyes. Her forehead was covered in cold sweat, and there was no follow-up attack. It was as if she had just awoken from a long nightmare caused by her emotions. All the strength in her body had completely disappeared from her previous outburst. Huff, puff. Kaslana's body swayed, on the brink of collapsing. Klein's eyes narrowed as he rushed up to Isengard Stanton in 2 steps. He kneeled and tried to help him up. Isengard, who was sprawled on the ground, cried out in pain. "Run! Don't worry about me." Obviously, he didn't think that a 3-person group which instantly had one heavily injured member and another losing all her strength could retain the Desire Apostle. Thus he told Klein to immediately escape and meet up with the official Beyonders. Otherwise, all 3 of them would die there and then. At the same time, Isengard raised his right hand with difficulty, attempting to use some of his Beyonder powers so as to attract the attention of the official Beyonders who were quite a distance away. As for the tiny telegraph with the trumpet, it had long since flown to the wall because of Isengard's fall. Klein showed hesitation, and just as he was about to make a decision, he saw a thick black liquid flowing down from the ceiling, quickly forming a pitch-black figure. The figure seemed to be completely wrapped in a black curtain, only exposing a pair of cold blue eyes. At the sight of him, Klein felt as if he was seeing the most intense emotions and desires of a living creature. Fear, wrath, greed, jealousy, hunger, lust, etc. The Desire Apostle didn't waste the situation he painstakingly created, and he entered the activity room almost immediately. At this moment, out of the 3-person team of detectives, Kaslana was exhausted from the outburst of emotions, while Isengard Stanton's spine was severely injured, causing him to lose his ability to partake in combat. Only Klein was left unscathed. However, other than his revolver and Beyonder bullets, all of his mystical items were above the grey fog. Besides, he was facing a Sequence 5 Desire Apostle, a powerhouse capable of nurturing a devil dog. At that moment, the corners of Klein's lips curled up slightly. His right hand, which had been placed on the wound on Isengard's back, abruptly swiped, causing the obvious depression to shift to the side and onto a rib. The magician's most miraculous Beyonder power. Damage transfer. It allowed a wound to be transferred once on a body, turning a serious injury into a minor injury, but it was unable to transfer the damage to other people or items. When Klein saw that Isengard Stanton was injured, he had already thought of the subsequent countermeasures. By first acting as if they were out of solutions to make the Desire Apostle appear, and then transfer the great detective's wound to leave him with only a slight fracture in his ribs, Klein believed that Isengard would then be able to deal with the Desire Apostle with him. It was a struggle for survival that all humans on instinct. In this way, even if the Desire Apostle realized that something was amiss, it would be too late for him to escape. Once Klein completed the treatment and joined forces with the great detective, they would be able to stall the target until the official Beyonders arrived. Almost at the same time, the ring that Isengard had pointed outwards began to produce greenness that was filled with vitality. A faint glow soon enveloped Isengard's body, allowing his wounds to quickly heal. The fracture on his ribs was instantly healed. The great detective's pain was real, but his helplessness was just an act. However, this overlapped with Klein's help. When the Desire Apostle who was about to take action saw this scene, his eyes suddenly widened, and his body stopped abruptly. Being free from any ensnarement, he turned around and ran towards the window. During this process, his body quickly collapsed into a sticky black liquid. The liquid seeped into the ground, penetrated the wall, and disappeared. Klein raised his right hand just in time to snap his fingers. The air bullet went through the open window and shot outside, sending sparks flying everywhere. However, the Desire Apostle had completely disappeared. He ran really fast, without any hesitation at all. Are you a devil or not? This will only make things worse in the future. The corner of Klein's mouth twitched as he turned to look at Isengard Stanton, who had rolled around and stood up. The great detective happened to look at him. You're capable of healing wounds? You're capable of healing wounds? The two of them opened their mouths at the same time and asked the same question. After looking at each other, Isengard shook his head and smiled bitterly. I never expected that the trap I set would allow him to escape. As he spoke, his ring began to glow, and he looked around to confirm that the Desire Apostle had already left. Isengard then gave a brief explanation. I didn't have the chance to mimic the healing ability this afternoon. Later, I believed that I could use this to set a trap and make the Desire Apostle appear by making him think that I'm injured. Therefore, I deliberately bundled my wound in an exaggerated manner. He pointed to the cushion that elevated his left arm to his shoulder. Sure enough, it worked. But I didn't expect you to be able to deal with serious injuries, and... Isengard sighed softly. As a result, both of them putting healing the injuries as their top priority. No one held back the Desire Apostle, so the moment he realized that something was wrong, he immediately fled. Both Stanton and I had trump cards that the Desire Apostle didn't know about, and we wanted to use that to trick him. Who knew that we would cancel each other out and allow him to flee? Is this the so-called two rights make a wrong? Klein helplessly laughed. This is because we don't know each other well enough, and we didn't have good teamwork. No, it's my fault, Isengard said sincerely. When I saw that you didn't run away or defend yourself, and instead came over to help me, I should have deduced that you weren't flustered, that you had the confidence and means, but unfortunately while wearing this ring, my brain remained in a highly taxed state. I wasn't able to consider anything else. So sealed artifact 2-081 will passively reduce one's intelligence. Klein smiled and said, Mr. Stanton, it's not the time to discuss who's responsible. The Desire Apostle has already fled. We should consider our subsequent actions. Isengard took off his ring and turned to the door of the activity room. The official Beyonders are arriving soon. I'll go outside to calm Stuart and the others. After that we can come up with a plan. Are you joining me, or do you plan on handling some of your matters? The official Beyonders. Mr. Stanton previously mentioned the Nighthawks, the machinery hive mind, and the military. Please don't be an acquaintance. Yes, my spiritual intuition hasn't warned me, so it's probably not. Mr. Stanton is giving me a chance to clean up and dispose of any sensitive items so that I don't get into trouble with the unfriendly official Beyonders. Many thoughts flashed through Klein's mind as he asked, Mr. Stanton, when you grasped the Desire Apostle's location, where was he? Isengard thought and said, Your bedroom. He was sitting in front of your desk. How arrogant. Klein pointed out the door and said, I'll head over there to investigate. I'll see if he left behind any traces. If we can figure out what the Desire Apostle truly looks like, it'll definitely make apprehending him much simpler. I'll leave the rest to you. All right. Isengard moved to the side and helped up the weak Kaslana. Seeing this, Klein suddenly found it amusing. Having discussed so much and made preparations to set up a trap, we still failed to retain the Desire Apostle and ended up in this state. There are always more accidents than preparations. That's why Magician is just a sequence 7. After leaving the room, Klein went straight to the second floor and entered his bedroom. The arrangement inside remained unchanged, and even the distance between the chair and desk was no different from before. However, Klein seemed to see a figure wrapped in a pitch-black liquid. He sat there, looking straight ahead, waiting patiently and calmly for a chance. As expected of a cold-blooded, Klein looked at the glass panes of the oriel window and felt that he could divine if it had reflected something. The devil pathway is good at crime, so it wouldn't be so easy for him to leave clues behind. However, I can try going above the gray fog to give it a try. Klein inspected the area and began to burn some of the mysticism notebooks he wrote in passing. Not long after he finished dealing with the items, he saw a few strangers coming up to the second floor. The leader of the group was a man with a stiff face but a head of frizzled, messy, and stubborn brown hair. In his hand was an ancient silver mirror with strange patterns. On both sides of the mirror there were black gems which were decorated as eyes. "Hello, Mr. Moriarty. I am a Cancer Bernard of the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery. Can I inspect this place?" Klein immediately nodded and said, "No problem." He then politely said, "Do you need me to follow you and answer any of the questions you might have?" "All right. Sorry for the trouble. Mr. Stanton has mentioned to me about your situation," a Cancer said with a smile. Several of his team members followed behind him. They treated him differently, some ignoring him, some curious, some filled with hostility. "My situation? How exactly did Mr. Stanton introduce me and what story did he make up?" As his thoughts raced, Klein followed a Cancer into the bedroom again, while the rest of the official Beyonders paired up, each responsible for a different zone on the second floor. "This is where the Desire Apostle sat?" A Cancer pointed at the chair in front of the desk. He had clearly asked Isengard Stanton. "Yes," Klein answered frankly. Without another word, a Cancer raised the silver mirror and stroked its surface 3 times with his right hand. After a short pause, he said in a deep voice, "Honorable Erodes, my question is, what did the devil who was previously sitting here look like?" The lights around them suddenly turned dark, as if enshrouded by mist after a rainstorm. A strange aqueous glint appeared on the surface of the silver mirror, forming a scene. A man covered in a sticky black liquid sat on a chair with his back to the window while he faced the bed. Immediately after, the scene changed. The mirror in the corner vaguely reflected the dark shadow side profile, which was similarly covered by the pitch blackness. But he could vaguely make out an outline. The Desire Apostle had very high cheekbones and a pair of cold-looking blue eyes. Chapter 417. Erode seeing the scene in the silver mirror, Klein revealed a pensive expression. "This mirror is very powerful, and it even has its own name. It seems to be a living sealed artifact. Such items might not be too harmful, but the difficulty of sealing it is very high. It's seldom used except for special situations. This person named a Cancer Bernard from the machinery hive mind seems to be highly ranked. He should be a deacon, and definitely not a simple one at that. Divination is limited, so the outcome would almost be the same as the result shown by the silver mirror. Even if I were to go above the gray fog, I wouldn't obtain a better result. There's no way to determine the Desire Apostle's appearance. There are countless people in Backlund with high cheekbones and blue eyes." As Klein was in the midst of his thoughts, the scene produced by the silver mirror quickly dispersed. Following that, words in blood red appeared. Based on the principle of reciprocity, it's my turn to ask the question. If you lie or are unable to answer, you will have to accept an arranged mission by me or suffer a penalty. Klein pricked up his brows when he saw that. Is this some truth or dare mirror? Interesting. The words which resembled dripping blood slowly changed into new characters, forming a new sentence. What is Red Light's true name? Red Light. One of the leaders of the Great White Brotherhood? One of the 7 pure lights above the spirit world? Klein thought through it carefully and realized he didn't know the answer. He only knew of Yellow Light. Venathan. A Cancer's throat bobbed up and down as sweat gradually appeared on his forehead. After a brief moment of silence, he said in a deep voice, "Nanides." Wrong. The blood-red words on the mirror changed again. Mission or penalty? There was an obvious struggle on a Cancer's face. Finally, he breathed out and said, "Penalty." Just as he finished speaking, a streak of silver-white lightning appeared out of nowhere and struck his head. With sizzling sounds, a Cancer's hair stood on their ends, and his body collapsed with a thud. Small amounts of black smoke billowed from his body. However, the mirror didn't fall to the ground with him. Instead, it floated by itself and landed on the desk. After 2 seconds, a Cancer staggered to his feet and sat there, panting while shaking. Klein looked at everything in silence, unsure of how to react. After a while, a Cancer, who had recovered a little, looked at him and said with a forced smile, "You should have heard of sealed artifacts and know that they come with certain negative effects." "Yes." Klein looked at the standing hair on a Cancer's head and suddenly understood why his hairstyle was so frizzled, messy, and stubborn. Klein couldn't help but say, "Actually, you could do the questioning alone. There's no need for you to do it in front of me." Phew, the requirement of using this mirror is that there must be someone watching by the side. A Cancer was still trembling. "It's so sentient." Klein took 2 steps forward and came to the table. He carefully looked at the silver mirror out of curiosity and found that, apart from the strange patterns and 2 decorative eyes, there was nothing special about the sealed artifact. A Cancer, whose side was facing him, trembled as he chuckled. "You can pose questions to him. We don't mind." "No, I don't have any intention to." How could Klein play truth or dare with something like an Ouija board? As he spoke, he tried to touch the edge of the silver mirror. It's ice cold to the touch and has a metallic feeling. As Klein had this thought, he saw the ancient silver mirror tremble slightly. White words quickly appeared on it. "Your loyal and humble servant, a Rhodes, at your service." Klein's mind momentarily went blank. Then, he left the table without any change in expression. What's going on? This mirror was still playing truth or dare with others in a very cold and ruthless manner just a moment ago. How did it become like this in the blink of an eye? Klein was amused and puzzled. He quickly made a guess based on the information he had gathered. The silver mirror knows Red Light's true name, so it seems to be related to the spirit world to a certain extent. And the mysterious space above the gray fog seems to be connected to the spirit world as well. At the very least, when I summon myself, I will be able to see what appears to be the spirit world after passing through the door. Is this mirror named a Rhodes able to sense the aura of the gray fog? While these thoughts were flashing through his mind, Klein saw that a Cancer had recovered and stood up once again. He grabbed the ancient silver mirror while the other 2 members in the room also stopped pretending that they hadn't seen anything while they were aimlessly searching the room. After a series of inspections, Klein bade a Cancer and company farewell and found Isengard Stanton, who had returned to the activity room. "What do we do next?" he asked directly. Isengard replied with a solemn expression. "Let's have Stuart and the others have their families move in together. It will make it easier to protect them. However, this can only be a short-term solution. You and I, as well as Kaslana, will act normally and receive secret protection. Let's hope the Desire Apostle can be found as soon as possible. You're a believer of the god of steam and machinery, right?" "Yes," Klein replied as he drew a triangular sacred emblem on his chest. At the same time, he lamented a little. "For the foreseeable future, I can only go above the gray fog while inside the bathroom." In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Earl Hall, Audrey glanced at the elegantly shaped wall clock and slowly sat down in front of the dressing table despite her nervousness and excitement. She was heading to the home of her psychology teacher, Escalante, and take the key step of becoming an official member of the Psychology Alchemists. Before doing so, she needed to time herself well before praying to Mr. Fool for his help. "I should be able to see the angel this time, right?" Audrey thought with anticipation. After a few seconds of silence, she clasped her hands together in front of her mouth and nose and softly chanted the honorific name of the Fool. In 15 Minsk Street, Klein was standing in the living room, looking at the scene which had finally turned quiet as he sighed. To him, the Desire Apostle only meant danger, but to Stuart and the others, it was a change in their lives. "I hope it can be settled as soon as possible. With so many Beyonders with so many sealed artifacts, there must be something effective against the devil pathway." In the midst of his thoughts, Klein suddenly heard a series of illusory pleas. "It should be Miss Justice." Having been prepared, he looked around before walking to the bathroom as if nothing had happened. After locking the bathroom door, he couldn't help but sigh inwardly. "My life has also changed a little." Before the threat of the Desire Apostle was eliminated, he had to reduce the times he went above the gray fog while being secretly protected by the machinery hive mind. Next week, during the Tarot Club, the itinerary must be simplified. However, no matter how compressed it is, it'll still take nearly 10 minutes. Well, constipation is a very normal thing. Who says that Beyonders can't be constipated? Being optimistic, Klein took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the gray fog. Next, Audrey followed what she had been previously taught and set up a simple ritual, entering the artificial sleepwalking state. When Klein saw her blurry figure inside the Crimson Star, he went through the procedure. First using his spirit body to contain the Dark Emperor card, then picking up the paper figurine he cut with his improved cutting skills, and sending it out. As expected, the paper figurine gathered the power that was being stirred out of the gray fog, turning into a gigantic angel with 12 pairs of black wings. Audrey watched as the sacred and majestic angel descended before her, wrapping herself in its layers of wings. She was left speechless for quite some time. This is an angel, Mr. Fool's angel. And it even has 12 pairs of wings, an archangel. This is exactly the same as the descriptions in the legends of canon. This is also an angel of our tarot club. Audrey watched as the angel's silhouette rapidly faded away. She suddenly felt that it was exceptionally sweet. She thanked Mr. Fool with joy, excitement, and piousness, and then she called the maids and told them to get ready for her trip outdoors. Klein smiled and returned to the living room, looking at the bullet hole in the wall and lost himself in thought. Should I hang a cheap oil painting to cover it or repair it and paint over it? In Escalante's house at Hillston Borough, 7th Avenue. Audrey left her maid and bodyguard in the living room and followed the mistress of the house into the activity room with Susie, her huge golden retriever. In the activity room, there were 2 other people waiting. One of them was Hilbert Alucard, the psychologist who was introduced to her by Lady Norma. The other was Stephen Hamprez, who had organized the previous psychology discussion. At that moment, although it was already time for the banquet, there was only a single ordinary candle lit in the room. The candle was placed in the middle of the coffee table as its faint yellow flame flickered, dispersing the darkness in the activity room. After greeting each other, Hilbert, with his slightly brown skin that was thanks to the tiny bit of Southern Continent blood in him, glanced at Susie, but he didn't say a word. Audrey smiled apologetically and said, "I feel more secure with it around." Susie also looked at Hilbert with innocent eyes. "Understandable. Please have a seat." Hilbert smiled and sat down on the sofa on the other side of the coffee table. Hamprez and Escalante also took their seats. After Audrey had taken her seat, Hilbert lifted the candle wick to brighten it a little. He looked at Audrey through the candlelight. "Now answer me honestly. Are you sure you want to join the psychology alchemists?" Under the illumination of the candlelight, his eyes seemed to be dyed with a hint of gold. Deep within his pupils, there seemed to be another eye, a vertical eye. Audrey's mind suddenly turned adrift for a moment before she regained her senses. She lightly nodded and said, "Yes." Hilbert asked again, "Will you intentionally hurt the psychology alchemists?" His tone carried a strange inducement, as though as long as the person being questioned gave an affirmative answer, they would unwittingly agree and abide by it from the bottom of their hearts. "No," Audrey answered very logically. After a few questions, Hilbert, Escalante, and the others heaved sighs of relief. The former smiled and asked, "Is there anything else you would like to say?" Audrey hesitated for a moment and then displayed her sincerity. "I once purchased the spectator formula at a Beyonder gathering. I am already a spectator. That Beyonder gathering is called the Tarot Gathering." Audrey thought to herself proudly. Chapter 4:18. The power of the mind. Audrey knew that her mind and psyche were being influenced by some kind of Beyonder power. It was only because of the angel's blessing, provided by Mr. Fool, that she was able to miraculously be immune to that state. Therefore, she decided to set certain things in motion, using small secrets to stun her counterparts, so as to hide the more crucial matters, in return for obtaining greater trust. The reason why she was doing this wasn't because she didn't believe in the angel, but because she felt that she could observe her counterparty just like how they were observing her. Although she had always hidden herself in the dark, and pretended to not be considered a Beyonder, performing in a way which would not arouse suspicion, she was still more willing to take the members of the psychology alchemists seriously. After all, they were professionals, and she could only be considered a dabbler in the Beyonder circle. She lacked the experience and wasn't flexible enough. It was very possible that she would expose certain problems from things she had yet to realize. In that case, she might as well take this opportunity to confess and completely dispel some of the doubts of the psychology alchemists' members. She had called the descent of the angel and its envelopment of her with its wings as a blessing. Upon hearing Audrey's reply, both Escalante and Hamprez showed a brief look of surprise. For a moment, they even doubted their own powers. As for Hilbert, He curled the corners of his lips into a faint smile, showing no abnormal reaction. He nodded in satisfaction and gently said, "Your honesty is admirable." "Anything else?" Audrey pretended to be in a trance as she shook her head. "There isn't anything else." Hilbert thought for a moment before asking a few more questions. "Which Beyonder gathering did you buy the Spectator formula from? Who did you buy it from? Where did you get the ingredients for concocting the potion?" Audrey's eyes dotted around slightly as she showed an expression of recalling. "I have to keep the Beyonder gathering a secret. I was unable to see what the person who sold me the Spectator formula looks like. But from the way he speaks, I could determine that he was a believer of the Lord of Storms." Upon hearing that, Hilbert nodded slightly, as though he recalled something. Audrey continued, "My Spectator potion ingredients were mainly found from my family's vault. The rest were exchanged from my few friends." 2 Spectator potions, she added silently. Most of them were found from her family's vault. Hilbert, Escalante, and Hamprez ruminated over the words, momentarily at a loss for words. After a few seconds, Hilbert nodded to Escalante and Hamprez, indicating that he found everything all right. After receiving the same reply from the rest, the gold tinge in his eyes faded, and the vertical pupil in his eyes faded rapidly. Hilbert touched the wick of the candle again, causing the flame to flicker. In that instance of alternating light and darkness, Audrey discovered that the strange power that affected her had suddenly disappeared. She controlled her adrift expression and switched to an appearance of doubt and inquiry. "I didn't expect you to already be a spectator." Hilbert chuckled. "Huh." Audrey showed her surprise and panic at the right moment. Knowing what kind of emotional reaction to show in the appropriate situation and knowing, in detail, what kind of expression and body language to react with was the basic skill of a telepathist. Hilbert smiled and said, "There's no need to be nervous. We don't mind. That was the last of our tests. Congratulations. You have passed all the tests. Now, you're an official member of our Psychology Alchemists." "All right then." Audrey hesitated, then she smiled. It felt like a dream. She then stood up, lifted the edges of her skirt, and bowed at Hilbert and the others. She then said with a faint smile, "We are now companions." Escalante and the others immediately stood up and bowed to the beautiful girl of noble status who was so polite to them. After the two sat back down, Hilbert organized his words and said, "Miss Audrey, I'm going to formally explain to you about the situation of the Psychology Alchemists." "All right," Audrey said with a smile. "Just call me by my name." Hilbert nodded. Leaning back, he crossed his right leg and clasped his hands. The original Psychology Alchemists was just a seminar for enthusiasts who all believed that the mind has limitless power and infinite wonders. Later on, this seminar obtained a treasure map and found the relics left behind by Hermes. Hermes of the Hermes language? Audrey asked in excitement. Yes, he was one of the earliest masters of mysticism from the human race, and the language of ancient Hermes that he created resonated with the power of nature. He was active during the Dark Second Epoch. Back then, humans were only the servants and slaves of giants, Hilbert said with utmost reverence. He let out a soft sigh. The original members of the Psychology Alchemists found a lot of things from the ruins. They discovered that Hermes was a mysticism master in the field of the mind. His research target was the dragons that ruled the sky during the Second Epoch. To be precise, the dragons of the mind. The information he left behind shows that mind dragons have advanced far into this field and have achieved the same level of achievement as deities. I know. The dragon of imagination Ankwelt was an ancient god. Audrey thought quite complacently. Hilbert sighed and said, "Those materials laid the foundation and direction for the research of our Psychology Alchemists. We believe that the mind has many secrets and that every one of them is hidden somewhere deep and difficult to grasp." Forgive me for using the adjective deep, which seems to be the most appropriate term to me. The slightest mistake in the study of those secrets would cause irreversible harm to the body. Audrey, you have to remember that matters in this aspect needs to be done carefully. After Audrey nodded, he continued. If we can unravel the secrets of the mind, then we can, on the one hand, unearth the power hidden deep in one's consciousness, and accomplish many miraculous deeds, and on the other hand, we can influence or even control the minds of others. After reaching this level, what lies ahead is the sea of gathered collective subconsciousness, which is the place we look forward to the most. Of course, the description of a collective subconsciousness isn't accurate enough. I prefer to call it the mind world of all living beings. It has a veiled and miraculous connection to the spirit world. If one can master this mind world, what kind of beyonder powers would we obtain? Audrey showed her curiosity at the right moment and her lack of knowledge in this area. Hilbert smiled and said, "You should have noticed some of the wonderful phenomena in the real world. When we wish to receive something, it will happen to appear. When we want to visit a friend, they will happen to knock on the door. And when we desire something to happen, it begins at that exact moment. You might say it's a coincidence, but sometimes there are too many coincidences. Our research shows that many of these coincidences are caused by an unconscious, magical influence of the mind. When you master the mind world, which is also the sea that gathers the collective subconscious, then you will master coincidences, creating magical phenomena that make chance appearances as an echo of your mind. It will appear as you wish." This is too amazing. Audrey had heard the son mention the Dragon of Nightmare before, but the description was far less detailed than Hilbert's. Hilbert chuckled and said, "At our level, it's better not to discuss such a deep and profound question. If we do, we'll easily lose ourselves. I'll continue introducing the psychology alchemists." The discovery of the ruins marked the establishment of the organization. The members at the beginning wanted to maintain a state of pure academic discussion, but they would always need help when encountering matters. Similarly, they lack items and research materials. That's why the psychology alchemists slowly became systematic and transformed into a real secret organization. However, compared to other secret organizations, our structure and relationships are still relatively loose. "That's what I like about it," Audrey expressed her opinion. Hilbert explained the main rules and regulations, before finally concluding, "When you reach a higher rank, you'll be able to meet the other members. I'll now give you the Sequence 8 Telepathist Potion." They did prepare a telepathist potion as expected. Audrey was both glad and proud. After seeing the lustrous potion, she hesitated and said, "I wish to consume it after I get back." She still doesn't trust us, and she wishes to make confirmation. Hilbert read Audrey's thoughts and replied with a smile. "Okay. With your performance, drinking the telepathist potion shouldn't be a problem." Audrey beamed and thanked him before asking a probing question. "Can you give me the potion formula to psychiatrist? I wish to seek out and gather the ingredients ahead of time, so that I don't waste any time." When other people join the psychology alchemists, other than hoping to get a formula, don't they hope to apply for the corresponding beyonder ingredients? Who says it in such a carefree manner and talk about trying to gather them ahead of time? Hilbert, Hamprez, and Escalante were speechless for a while as they looked at the girl who spoke of such things with a normal tone. A few seconds later, Hilbert forced out a smile. "I'll help you make the application. Normally, this would require contribution points, and contribution points come from the missions we assign you, the research contributions you make, and the new information and materials you gather." "Okay, I'll do my best," Audrey said briskly. She remained silent after leaving Escalante's house, but only until she entered her room and sent Annie and the others away did she turn to the huge golden retriever and smile. "Susie, we got your potion. It's a pity that the rainbow salamander that Alfred found for me couldn't be of use. It can only be exchanged for money." Audrey sighed emotively in her heart. Susie looked at the bottle containing the telepathist potion and wagged her tail cheerfully. Audrey had hung a pair of gold-rimmed glasses around her neck just for laughs. Hillston Borough. In Isengard Stanton's house. Klein had been invited to breakfast. Apart from him, Kaslana was invited as well. After eating a mouthful of the soft potato pie, Klein praised, "Mr. Stanton, your cooking skills are excellent." Isengard, who had gray hair at his temples, smiled and said, "It's a specialty of Lenberg." And to the beyonders of the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, being multi-talented is a common trait. Its sequence 6 is called polymath. It's easy for people to lose control for the corresponding potion. Until now, I still don't have the confidence to make the advancement attempt. Chapter 419. Wishing Polymath. This sequence sounds strong just from its name. The Reader Pathway Sequence 7 is called Knowledge Keeper or Detective. It's a job that leans towards grasping knowledge and deduction. At most, it would be accompanied by decent combat techniques and the ability to use machinery, so it cannot be considered powerful. But at Sequence 6, there seems to be a sudden qualitative change, especially more so in the field of beyonder combat. From the looks of it, Each Beyonder pathway has its own critical point below the high sequences, but it isn't fixed at a particular sequence. For example, the seer pathway's critical point is magician. Klein drank a mouthful of hot coffee and didn't try probing on the secrets to other sequences. Instead, he smiled and said, "Mr. Stanton, you seem to be quite relaxed. You're not nervous or worried at all." Isengard didn't answer immediately. He put down his knife and fork, took out his pipe and said, "You don't mind, right?" "Actually, I do, but the pollution and smog in Backlund is already so bad that a few more puffs of secondhand smoke won't make it any worse." Klein shook his head and smiled. "This aids in your thinking?" "More accurately, it's a habit that I have after breakfast every day." Done with his pipe, Isengard took a deep drag. As the smoke was exhaled, he sighed and said, "Fear, nervousness, and worry doesn't help us face the threat. In that case, why not take it a little easier? The brain will become more active because of this." My assistant easily got worried, which led to his fatal disaster. Sigh. Isengard glanced at Kaslana and continued, "Furthermore, our opponent is a desire apostle. We have to refrain from having intense emotions." Having said that, he chuckled. "Most importantly, we have no other means of locating the desire apostle." "What do we do?" Kaslana put down the last piece of bacon and asked seriously. Isengard took a drag and said in a self-deprecating manner, "When discussing topics like this, I prefer reclining chairs. Apart from being able to sense danger, devils aren't good at divination or premonition. Therefore, if a desire apostle wishes to figure out the main revenge target, he would need to actively investigate and gather information. Otherwise, how would he know which group of private detectives had made considerable contributions to the serial murder? How was he able to precisely pinpoint you and me? In such a process, he definitely would have interacted with many people. Even in a disguise, he's bound to leave some clues. In addition to the rough image given by the machinery hive mind, this will form clues. Similarly, if he wants to attack me, then he has to find out where I live, what are my entry and exit patterns, as well as when I work or rest. He also needs to know if there are powerful official Beyonders protecting me. This requires a considerable observation period and corresponding inquiries, and similarly, this means interacting with others in certain locations. Heh. Once there's an interaction, there will be clues. I like the maxim. Wherever he steps, whatever he touches, whatever he leaves, even unconsciously, will serve as a silent witness against him. I know that sentence. It was said by Emperor Roselle. Klein smiled. Soon after, he felt a little despondent, because this was the second time he heard someone mention this maxim in this world. The last time it happened was when he was in Tingen. Kaslana, whose cheeks were drooping, sighed. As expected of a great detective. I never thought about such things. I admire your observation and reasoning skills. Isengard responded with a smile. Everyone has their own areas of expertise. If it's just fighting, then I would be defeated by you again and again. Sherlock must have also thought of the things I just said. He also has outstanding observation and reasoning skills, and he's an outstanding detective. Actually, I felt a little ashamed when you were speaking so confidently earlier. Klein squeezed out a smile. No, you're a true detective, and I'm still a long way off. You really are a modest young man. Isengard sighed. He smiled and said, Next up, we'll proceed by taking these points in mind. You'll have to use your own resources and information channels. Aside from the Tarot Club, a third of my resources and information channels in Backlund are from you, my good old man. Klein forced a smile and replied, All right. Apart from the Beyonder gathering held by Eye of Wisdom, the only people he could seek help from were Merrick, Miss Sharon, Vampire Emlyn White, and Father Utravsky. With the machinery hive mind secretly protecting me, I'll have to eliminate Miss Sharon and Merrick. I can visit Emlyn the vampire as he's now a half-believer of Mother Earth, and is under the protection of Bishop Utravsky. He wouldn't encounter any danger from the official Beyonders. Klein instantly decided on the direction to take. Kaslana remained silent for a few seconds before replying, No problem. Klein wiped the remaining cream onto the last bit of toast, chewed, and swallowed it at a leisurely pace before asking, Mr. Stanton, you previously mentioned the activation of a particular sealed artifact. Will it be able to help us deal with the Desire Apostle? Yes, it played a critical role in finding and surrounding the Devil Dog back then, Isengard replied frankly. Its code name is 1 to 42. 1 to 42? A Grade 1 sealed artifact is highly dangerous and can only be used in limited ways. Even the Baklund diocese can only keep 1 or 2 items. A corresponding description flashed across Klein's mind, and he asked with great interest, "What is it? What abilities and negative effects does it have?" Isengard laughed and said, "That is a secret of the Church of the Evernight Goddess. I do not know, and I only know that it was originally not in Baklund. It was rushed here as an emergency because of the serial murders. It is said that it's a full-body armor which is silver in color with dark red bloodstains. It once caused the destruction of a small city, and over 100,000 people died because of it." "Cursed armor?" Klein asked in return by giving it a name. Isengard spewed a mouthful of smoke and shook his head in seriousness. "Perhaps it isn't cursed. Some people call it Berserker's armor, or Bloodthirster's armor. My church once guessed that the blood it stained with comes from a deity from ancient times. When it was first discovered, it appeared to be nothing out of the ordinary. It was treated as a simple antique, sold and collected by others. But as time passed, those who came into contact with it died, one after another. It was an extremely terrifying death, nearly to the point of dismemberment, and after that, with it as the center, death spread outwards. There was no longer any need for contact, and as such, a small city was destroyed. This happened early in the 5th epoch. The Nighthawks were responsible for the aftermath. As expected of a Beyonder from the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. He knows enough history and Beyonder events. Klein secretly praised. Kaslana asked, sounding a little worried, "Will it bring us danger?" "The Church of the Evernight Goddess definitely found the right way of sealing it, but for us, it's best if we avoid contact as much as possible," Isengard said, half as consolement and half as a warning. After breakfast, he and Klein went into the activity room where the fight had taken place. Kaslana first headed to the bathroom. Looking at her back, Klein thoughtfully said, "She seems to be a Beyonder from the Arbiter pathway? Your observation skills are indeed outstanding." Isengard sat down in the reclining chair. As Klein walked to the sofa, he whispered in confusion, "This pathway is strictly controlled by the royal family, the military and the ancient nobles. Very few formulas and ingredients appear in the outside world. Kaslana has such a background?" Isengard smiled and said, "Quite obviously. However, even to this point, she hasn't taken the initiative to mention the relevant matters. This implies that there really is a reason that makes it somewhat inconvenient for her to mention it." He looked at Klein with a smile in his eyes, as if to say, "Aren't you the same as well?" Klein laughed dryly and sat down. After a while, Kaslana came to the activity room and continued discussing the matter regarding the Desire Apostle with Klein and Isengard. As she was speaking, her expression suddenly became gloomy and she sighed. "I was pulled into the most dangerous case this time. I have no idea if I'll survive this at the end. If I were to be killed by the Desire Apostle, I wish to have this on my tombstone. She had a great mother." Kaslana's voice gradually lowered as her difficult-to-get-along with personality seemed to soften. Isengard shared the same sentiments and nodded. "Similarly, he's the most dangerous enemy I've encountered." He then laughed and said, "If I die because of this, and both of you are still alive, would you be willing to help me deliver my remains to the Holy Temple of Knowledge in Lenberg?" "Stop raising death flags." Klein's mouth was half open, and he didn't know how to stop the two detectives in front of him. "No problem, but I hope this day will never come." He tried his best to dispel the thought. Isengard glanced at him and asked curiously, "Sherlock, what about you? If you were killed by the Desire Apostle, what wish do you have that you hope others can fulfill for you?" "Revive me." Klein sighed and said, "I hope that I can be buried in a cemetery with good scenery. It's best if my corpse is intact and is sprinkled with holy water and fresh flowers." The core meaning of his words was, "Do not cremate me." The three of them fell silent for a while until they heard the tinkling sound of the doorbell. The visitor was the deacon named de Cancer Bernard from the Machinery Hive Mind. His hair was stubbornly squeezing out from the brim of his hat, giving his deep masculine outline an indescribably messy feeling. This time, he wasn't holding the silver mirror named a Rhodes. It was unknown where he had put it. "If I have a chance, I wouldn't mind using that magic mirror to see how my loyal and humble servant would react," Klein thought. Cancer didn't enter. He stood there, looking at the detective trio. He then quickly said in a deep voice, "There's a clue to the Desire Apostle." Chapter 420. Devil Family Westboro, 6 Edward Street. Icancer Bernard pressed down on his black hat, pointed at the door behind the fountain, and said to Klein, Isengard and Kaslana, "We have reverse investigated the various information channels for any leaks of news or information. Combined with the outline of their side profile as well as getting the help of the magic mirror, we managed to have a preliminary suspect." You obviously paused for a moment when you mentioned the magic mirror. I wonder what price you paid to get the answer you wanted. Klein sensed the problem in Icancer's tone and felt a baffling hint of sympathy for him. "It's the owner of this house?" Kaslana returned with a question, sounding almost certain. Isengard Stanton looked around and said, as if pondering, "You chose to inform us directly because you found another piece of evidence?" "Yes, the portrait of the house's owner proves some of it." He never takes photographs," Icancer answered frankly. "Besides, the people around here have seen a big black dog in the neighborhood many times in the past. This can basically prove that the suspect is that Desire Apostle." Having said this, Isengard couldn't help but laugh. "Sorry, we were too anxious and didn't give you a chance to introduce the suspect." As he walked around the fountain and toward the front door of the house, Icancer quickly said, "The owner of this house is Patrick Jason, the principal shareholder of a small bank. According to the description from his neighbors, he's a cheerful, enthusiastic, and optimistic middle-aged man who has remained a bachelor, but it is believed that he had several mistresses. At this level of wealth, the number of servants he hires is utterly inadequate. Every time a banquet or ball is held, he would need to hire a batch of temporary attendants from the City Family Servant Assistance Association. In regards to this, his explanation is due to a problem of insomnia. Too many servants will affect the silence he needs. I can tell that he has many secrets which need hiding, so he doesn't dare to hire too many servants," Isengard said half-jokingly. Klein, who didn't hire a single servant, said somewhat guiltily, "Perhaps it's simply because his finances aren't as good as others think." "Yes, that's a factor that cannot be ruled out." Isengard stepped up to the porch and came in front of the main door. Icancer looked at Klein and said as if in enlightenment, "You don't hire servants and only have your landlord's maid do temporary cleaning twice a week. Is it to conceal the secret that you're a beyonder?" "Of all my secrets, that is the most trivial one." Klein deliberately smiled bitterly and said, "Yes." As they spoke, Icancer pushed open the front door, and an indescribable stench drifted out. The smell of decay. Isengard made a judgment in an instant. Icancer called over a machinery hive mind team member. "Carlson, any discoveries?" The beyonder, Carlson, wore thick glasses and had a complicated expression on his face. "We found a lot of bodies here. In the cement in the basement, in the thick walls, and in the places where the garden is overgrown with weeds, one hidden corpse after another was found. The earliest could be from more than a decade ago, and the latest are the servants who were still alive a few days ago. Some of them are just bones, some slightly rotten. Deacon, this place is like a human slaughterhouse." As he spoke, the machinery hive mind members and the carefully selected police officers behind him carried out one corpse after another. Some of the corpses were dismembered. Tongues, fingers, stomach bags, eyes, etc. were all lying in disarray. Some of the corpses were only bones. It looks like many of Backlund's disappearance cases will be solved because of this. Isengard pinched his nose and sighed. When Klein saw an intestine which was almost dragged across the ground, he exhaled and turned to look around the house. Machinery hive mind member, Carlson, muttered again. Jason paid his servants very high wages and gave them a lot of holidays. The servants living around him were all very envious. Jason's cook even promised his child that he would be home this week and take him to the circus to watch a performance. A true devil. Kaslana was slightly perturbed. Looking around, Klein restrained his emotions and solemnly asked, "Why are the furnishings of the house so simple and crude?" As a banker, even if the bank he owns isn't big, Jason should have had expensive porcelain, excellent paintings, luxurious wall clocks, and all sorts of items made of high-quality silk. Why can't we see any of that here? Well, the wood for his furniture is still pretty good. Carlson glanced at Deacon Icancer, and after receiving an assenting nod he said, "It's clear that Jason had planned this revenge for a long time. He sold the valuable but inconspicuous items in the house, and he had even agreed to the Varvat Bank's purchase of his estate. After killing his servants, he sped up his liquidation and sold the oil painting and other items. He appeared to be certain that he would definitely be found, and he didn't have any thoughts of getting lucky. Before taking action, all he had left was his house, furniture, and identity. It's unknown where he had moved large quantities of cash, precious metals, and jewelry to. After listening to Carlson's description, Klein suddenly thought of a few adjectives. Calm, rational, crazy. A true devil, Isengard evaluated before sharing his deductions. He is clear-headed and calm in his actions, but he has a strong crazy tendency and a spirit of adventure, which is characteristic of the past two deeds. Therefore, we have to be wary of him taking risks. Klein grasped the gist of Detective Stanton's words. Yes. Isengard gravely nodded. Next, the few detectives searched the house and found a lot of evidence to prove that Patrick Jason was problematic. They also saw the portrait hanging in the activity room. It depicted a middle-aged man with tall cheekbones, blue eyes with a tiny of gray, ordinary facial features, and neatly combed hair. He didn't have any special features. At that moment, a cancer came in and said to Klein and the others, "We found some items in a secret chamber that confirms that Jason Patrick had attempted to summon an even more powerful devil, but for some reason, he didn't succeed. And those items have confirmed his identity. He's a member of the devil family known as Beria, so his real name should be Jason Beria." The Beria family? Klein nodded, unsurprised. In the ancient Fourth Epoch, the human faction that worshipped devils formed a scattered alliance known as the Blood Sanctify sect. This organization was internally divided quite drastically. The three great devil families of Noise, and Ariel, and Beria were a tripartite balance of forces. Their ancestors once received the bestowment of the Abyss, and they worship an evil god by the name, Dark Side of the Universe. They believe that he is the ruler of the Abyss and that he is the devastator of the world who would corrupt and degenerate the real world's entire universe. Isengard introduced to the unaffiliated Beyonders, Kaslana and Klein. A cancer shook his head and added, "If a deeply divided organization doesn't eventually split, integration and unification are inevitable trends. Various situations and rumors indicate that the Beria and Anariel families have gradually weakened since at least 1,000 years ago, to the point of becoming vassals of the Noise family in recent decades. Well, the Beria family's symbol is the abstract symbol combination of a pentagram and goat horns. Regardless, the Beria family is still an extremely ancient family with deep roots. It's no wonder Jason was able to raise a devil dog. Sigh, that's just one of the reasons. Another reason is that he owns a bank, even if it wasn't big. In the Second Epoch, the ancient god that corresponds to the dark side of the universe is Devil Monarch, Farbati. Is there any connection between the two? Klein sighed while feeling curious. After much searching, the three detectives and the Machinery Hive Mind members could only confirm that Jason Patrick was the Desire Apostle, but they were unable to find the man's current location. On the pretext of getting help from others, Klein took a handkerchief that Jason had used during the devil summoning ritual, with plans on finding a chance to divine above the gray fog. After all, Jason had dealt with the items he often came into contact with. Shortly after, a cancer came to them and said with a heavy expression, "The Nighthawks will be bringing that sealed artifact here. We will be making a move first." "All right," Isengard and Kaslana answered at the same time. As for Klein, he had long since raised his hands and feet in approval inwardly. After exiting Jason's villa, which occupied a large area, Klein looked back and his expression gradually turned grim. He said doubtfully, "I think there's a problem." "What problem?" Kaslana hurriedly asked. Klein deliberated and said, "He sold the bank, his business, and many valuable items ahead of time. That means that Jason is prepared to give up his current identity and life. If his motive is solely to seek revenge on the devil dog, it's not sufficient to initiate such a series of actions. Maybe he had a very deep relationship with the devil dog? Sherlock, you might not think so, but I've seen people who treat pets as family," Kaslana said in disagreement. Isengard, who was standing beside them, solemnly said, "No, Sherlock is quite right. Kaslana, do you know what the ancient name of the Devil Pathways Sequence 8 is?" Kaslana revealed a look of contemplation. She had apparently heard of it, but she couldn't immediately recall it. At that moment, Klein answered for her in a low voice. "Cold-blooded. Cold-blooded." As she mulled over the name, she suddenly understood why the two great detectives, Moriarty and Stanton, would say so. Seeing her reaction, Klein pointed in another direction. Let's split up and begin with our own information channels. After receiving an affirmative response from Isengard and Kaslana, he left in a hurry. However, he didn't rush south of the bridge to find Emlyn White. He wanted to head to the Chisak police station and retrieve the £50 he posted as bail. He has already been proven to be without problems. Both Isengard Stanton and the official Beyonders had given their respective testimonies. Chapter 421. Expensive materials. The front door to Jason Patrick's house suddenly burst open, and a group of Nighthawks in black tweed coats jogged inside. They wore vigilant and alert expressions, as though they were facing an extremely terrifying enemy. Tap, tap, tap. A person decked out in full silver armor walked in. The armor exuded a feeling that made it seem like it was abnormally heavy. Various details about it adhered to an ancient style, and from its left shoulder, all the way diagonally to the abdomen area, it was stained with a splash of dark red blood that appeared impossible to remove. Coupled with the sputtering red spots in other places, it created a very queer and beautiful scene, as if it was a unique and magnificent decoration. Soul Assurer Soas took out his pocket watch and gave it a look. Change. The silver armor stopped, lifting its visor to reveal the wearer. It was a handsome man with black hair and green eyes. Leonard, hot water has been prepared in the master bedroom's bathroom on the second floor. Don't delay any longer. Otherwise, you'll only be able to return to the embrace of the goddess, Soast exhorted him. Yes, Captain Soast. Leonard Mitchell, with the help of the rest of the Nighthawks, removed his heavy blood-stained silver armor. With red gloves on, he didn't say anything, nor did he hesitate as he rushed to the second floor and found the bathtub still billowing with white steam. Leonard quickly stripped off his clothes and lied down in the hot water without even exposing his nose. His skin quickly turned red like a cooked lobster, and strange scar-like silver lines gradually started to appear on the surface of his skin. Those silver lines were like pure blade beams which constantly spread outwards and fused with the hot water. In less than 10 seconds, the steam disappeared and a thin layer of transparent ice formed on the surface of the hot water. Only when all the silver lines dispersed did Leonard sit up, panting heavily. He cocked his head slightly as if he was listening to something. Then he said with a lowered voice, "Old man, do you know the origins of 1 to 42? An elderly voice rang out in his mind. You are getting more and more impolite. I don't know where that strange armor comes from." Without waiting for Leonard to ask further, he let out a chuckle. "But I think I recognize the owner of the blood." "Who is it?" Leonard asked curiously. The slightly aged voice said in a low, deep voice, "An ancient god before the cataclysm." South of the bridge, Rose Street, Harvest Church. As soon as Klein stepped into the quiet prayer hall, he saw Father Utravsky and vampire Emlyn White, one in the front and one in the back, sitting on chairs of different heights. Their hands were placed in front of their mouths and noses, with their fingers clasped together and palms empty. This was the unique prayer position of the Church of Mother Earth. All novelful. Right now, Emlyn White's expression was gentle and calm, without any trace of the arrogance and vexation which he had before. Klein slightly moved the corner of his mouth as he silently drew a triangular sacred emblem on his chest. He took a seat at random, waited until the prayer was over, and then walked over to Emlyn White. He said with a smile, "You are especially pious today." "What?" Emlyn snapped to his senses as he muttered to himself while his expression was pale. "What have I done? What have I done?" His voice trailed off, as though recalling what he had just done. "Maybe it's not a bad thing." Klein consoled the vampire in an utterly unconvincing manner before sitting down next to him. "I don't want to hear others say something like that. Although I feel my resistance is weakening." Emlyn wore a livid expression and he said with a tone filled with despondence, "But I don't want to betray the moon." Klein didn't continue with the topic that depressed the vampire as he casually asked, "Do you sanguines worship the primordial moon, or a particular deity that represents the moon? Or perhaps, the two of them can be considered the same?" "All of them." Emlyn slightly raised his chin. "To a pure-blooded sanguine, we obviously believe in the deity that represents the moon. Of course, it is the god who represents the moon. Her name is Lilith, and she is the ancestor of us sanguine, an ancient deity. And when humans become sanguine, they tend to worship the primordial moon. Under normal circumstances, the two can be considered equivalent, but there are times when they do not overlap and there are differences. A human becoming a sanguine? Klein wasn't surprised that Emlyn White was able to say the name of an ancient god from the Second Epoch. Instead, he was more concerned about the tidbit about humans becoming sanguine. Is this the vampire sequence that Mr. Azek had mentioned? He thought. Emlyn said with a slightly complicated expression, yes, there are two types. One is transformed from a bestowment from a powerful sanguine, and the other is transformed from consuming a corresponding potion. The latter is our most hated enemy. Why? Klein vaguely guessed at the answer. Emlyn gritted his teeth and replied, the main ingredient of their potion is our blood essence. As expected. Klein turned his head and sized up Emlyn a few times. The gaze left Emlyn feeling a little nervous as he snorted. You're already a Beyonder. There's no way you can switch pathways. It's only because this is my first time seeing a walking, no, a living, no, talking Beyonder ingredient. However, in a certain sense, every human Beyonder is also such an ingredient. Klein originally only wanted to inwardly make a casual joke, but soon he felt a strong sense of sadness. At this moment, Emlyn looked at the Bishop Utravsky, who was carefully polishing the sacred emblem of life, and said in a low voice, I found two ingredients that you wanted. What are they? Klein didn't attempt to hide his joy. Emlyn responded smoothly. Thousand-faced hunter's mutated pituitary gland and blood. The asking price is £2,000 for the former and £300 for 100 milliliters of the latter. 300. Klein blurted out. Can I get a discount? After receiving his bail money back, he had a total of £2,185 in cash. For a member of the middle class, this was already quite an abundant amount of savings. Perhaps some people might not be able to save that much money in their entire lifetime, but Klein found that it wasn't enough. No, if it weren't for me, he would have wanted £2,800, and according to the agreement, you would have paid me an extra £150 for a total of £2,450, Emlyn said while shaking his head. Looking at Klein's expression, he quickly added, in this era, dragons are rare. Other than the long-lived sanguine, it is very difficult to find similar Beyonder ingredients elsewhere. Even if they exist, they would be more expensive than ours. I'm still short of £265. Having saved up so much money with such great difficulty, it will be emptied out at once. Yet, I still don't have enough. I hope Mr. Hanged Man will be able to sell the werewolf Beyonder characteristic as soon as possible. After this, there's still the characteristic of a human-skinned shadow and a deep-sea Naga's hair. It wouldn't be any cheaper. There's no way to confirm Little Sun's side of things, with him needing to conduct himself properly. The amount he owes me is probably best repaid by using the means to remove a rampager's mental corruption in a mystical item. That would be a better form of concealment. Many thoughts instantly flashed through Klein's mind as he felt the light outside the window dim significantly. He took a deep breath and said, okay. However, this deal will be delayed for some time. I recently provoked a fellow and am now being protected by official Beyonders. You don't wish for that cellar to be locked up in the cathedral's basement, right? And I still have to gather the rest of the money. Klein tilted his head slightly to look at the cathedral's dome. Official Beyonders? Emlyn White jumped up and looked around. Klein glanced at him and said, don't worry about it. You're now a priest of the Church of Mother Earth, and you have legal status. Moreover, Bishop Utravsky will protect you. I'm not. Emlyn's denial was exceptionally weak. He sat down again and suddenly thought of something as he said, can the official Beyonders resolve the problem of a psychological cue? Maybe. Klein almost burst out laughing. But in that case, you will most likely become a believer of the Evernight Goddess, the god of steam and machinery, or the Lord of Storms. Of course, you can also choose to become a member of the military's special department. They might be able to send you overseas as a spy to seduce some noble woman. I only like puppets and pure, beautiful girls. Emlyn immediately emphasized. I can tell that you're a little interested, but only a little. Klein switched gears and asked, do you know any members of the Beria family? Beria? That crazy family that worships devils? No, they are devils themselves. Emlyn blurted out. Why are you looking for them? Klein helplessly said, I've offended one of them, Jason Patrick Beria, due to a serial murder case. Help me find out his recent whereabouts and acquaintances in your circle. If you have any accurate information, I will pay you, depending on the importance of the information. Of course, this could also be claimed from the Nighthawks, the machinery hive mind, and the military. Klein thought with relief. Emlyn nodded thoughtfully. You actually dared to provoke a real devil. When you have exact information about him, he will know that you will bring him a great deal of harm. It's all right, I have the protection of the authorities, Klein replied indifferently. After a few seconds of silence, Emlyn said, Well, I'll try. The payment for information needs to be at least £20. After finalizing this matter, Klein didn't stay any longer, and he walked out of the cathedral. His mind was filled with the question of how he was going to gather the money. Miss Magician's new book is about to be published. She should receive a sizable amount of money for it. There will still be royalties later on. Perhaps I can promote the astrologer potion formula to her. However, she hasn't even gathered all the potion ingredients of Trickmaster. Miss Justice has joined the psychology alchemists, and I have no formulas to sell her. Sell her knowledge? The werewolf beyonder characteristic is worth about £1,300, perhaps even lower. Must I produce a mystical item? Or should I think of a way to get Emlyn White to become a believer of the Fool, receiving tributes at the cost of offering to remove the psychological cue? Right, Jason Beria carried a lot of cash, jewelry, and precious metals. If he can be found, perhaps I might get a share. As his thoughts raced, Klein walked out of the cathedral and saw the dark sky and the thin fog. He sighed and said, I'm really short on money. Back at Minsk Street, Klein walked into the bathroom with a thick stack of newspapers in his hand, as if he was about to fight a protracted war. He wanted to head above the grey fog and use Jason's handkerchief to divine his whereabouts. Chapter 422. The True Jason inside the bathroom in 15 Minsk Street. Klein took out a paper figurine from a concealed pocket, shook it, and transformed it into a body double. He made the body double sit on the toilet with a newspaper in hand as a way to deceive others. Then, he hid himself in the shadows, took 4 steps counterclockwise, and went above the grey fog. These series of actions were even more magical than magic. Inside the majestic ancient palace, Klein sat at the very end of the long bronze table, conjuring Jason Beria's handkerchief in front of him. It was only a projection, but it could also be used for divination as long as the handkerchief didn't leave his body in the real world. The earliest instance was back when he used the projection of the mutated sun's sacred emblem in Tinjin City as a divination object. At that time, he still didn't know how to summon himself, and he was unable to bring items with spirituality above the grey fog. Of course, there was still a big difference between using a projection and using the actual object for divination. Therefore, Klein often tried his best to use the actual object. But right now, with him being protected by official beyonders, it wasn't that convenient to carry out a ritual. If anyone were to find him lighting candles in the day while on the toilet, he would be in deep trouble. If I can really manage to obtain Jason Beria's location via divination, I can always take the risk by summoning myself and bringing the handkerchief up here if the revelation isn't clear enough. With a mumble, Klein produced a goatskin and a fountain pen. He wrote the divination sentence, Jason Beria's current location. Normally speaking, relying on a handkerchief that the target used only during a certain ritual made it impossible to divine the whereabouts of the target since the connection wasn't strong enough, and there was too much interference. For example, it was very easy to end up provoking the Abyss Grand Duke which the ritual was directed at. But for Klein, interferences could be eliminated. The so-called Abyss Grand Duke was at most a high-sequence devil, and not the incarnation of the dark side of the universe. Above the fog, the mysterious space had already handled deities like the eternal blazing sun and the true creator. Even a slightly weaker one was at the level of an angel, Mr. Dorr, and up to this point in time, he hadn't suffered any serious mishaps. As for the problem of the connection not being strong enough, Klein, who could only be enhanced to a certain degree by the grey fog, was helpless as well. He could only give it a try and try his luck. Perhaps it would only be after he became a high-sequence beyonder saint in this domain that he could have the corresponding confidence. All novelful. In theory, it's possible. After all, when holding a ritual, one's body, heart, and mind were unified the most. It was also the easiest to communicate with the outside world. Klein, who was now barely considered an expert in mysticism, muttered. He held the handkerchief and the goatskin with a divination statement written on it, and he leaned back into his chair. He quickly entered a state of cogitation and constantly chanted, Jason Beria's current location. After chanting it 7 times, Klein fell into a deep sleep and entered the dream world. Within the gray world, countless images flashed and intersected with each other in a rather dispersed manner. Soon, the scene became clear and filled Klein's vision, which made him feel as if he had entered a dream. In the dream, the lights were dim and the desk was dark red. A figure was standing in front of the oriel window, looking out at the garden. There was a glass shed in the garden, with roses blooming inside, bright red in the December cold. The figure of a man was projected on the window. He was of medium height, with curly brown hair and cold brown eyes. He looked to be in his 30s. Am I not divining Jason Beria's location? Who is this? He feels a little familiar. Klein was puzzled, but didn't think further about it. He let his spirituality remain in a dispersed state, as if he were roaming some mysterious world. Just as he raised the question, the man turned and walked to a corner of the room, where there were 2 large leather suitcases. The man squatted down and opened one of the suitcases. Inside was a neat stack of bills, with gold bars placed on top of them. The notes that were exposed were all in 10-pound denominations, while the gold bars shone with an enchanting luster. The man pulled something out of a hidden pocket of his suitcase, shook it, and opened it. It was a slightly pale piece of human skin. A complete piece of human skin. The man quickly stripped off his clothes and put on the human skin. In just 10 seconds, he had become Jason Beria with tall cheekbones, blue eyes with a tint of gray, and neatly combed hair. At this point, the scene suddenly shattered, and Klein opened his eyes. It's no wonder that Jason was willing to take a risk. So it turns out that in the past 10 years, he has always been wearing a human skin and has never shown his true face. As expected of a calm and crazy devil. Klein couldn't help but sigh. Jason had left his portrait in the house, and it didn't garner any suspicion from Isengard and the others, because his neighbors had seen him and knew what he looked like. Even without the portrait, with the powers of the Beyonders of the official organizations, it would have been easy to reconstruct his likeness, and the result would have been even better than a photograph. Therefore, there was no reason for Jason not to have the drive to destroy something like it. This was something very logical. Who would have thought that he would have left a hoax in somewhere that looked to be most natural? If searches are made according to the portrait, even if the Nighthawks have sealed artifact 1 to 42, it wouldn't be that easy to lock onto the target. Moreover, in both times, he had used his own abilities to conceal his face. Who would have thought that his face, which had been tightly covered and concealed, was actually fake? Klein realized how cunning Jason was. He rubbed his temples and began to recall the scenes he saw in the dream divination. A house with a glass greenhouse. That's a pretty obvious feature. There aren't many similar buildings in Backlund. But the question is, how do I report it? The moment I tell the machinery hive mind, Jason would definitely sense the danger and start to disguise himself and move away. Directly find the Nighthawk with sealed artifact 1 to 42? What if I encounter someone familiar? I don't want to turn into ashes and be scattered into the Tussock River. Besides, I can't rush to report it. I just started gathering information, so how is it possible to receive any information from my various channels so quickly? That fellow is really carrying a large sum of cash and jewelry, a whole suitcase worth of bills. The total value may exceed £50,000. Thoughts raced through Klein's mind and it took him a moment to calm down. He decided to wait another 2 days, then use the appropriate means to inform the Nighthawks in charge of this matter with the revelation he received. With the divination coming to an end, he returned to the real world, removed his double, and sat on the toilet himself. In the afternoon, Klein threw a coin when he was about to leave. The revelation he received was that it wasn't beneficial for him to head out. There will be danger if I head out? Klein didn't hesitate to return to his living room and sit down. After about 20 minutes, he heard the doorbell ring and saw that it was Isengard Stanton who had come to visit him. Mr. Stanton, any progress? Klein asked rather delightfully. Isengard pointed to the back of the hall. Let's talk inside. All right. Klein made way by stepping aside. After sitting on 2 sofas which faced each other, Isengard held his hunter's hat and took a deep breath. The Desire Apostle has appeared again. Seeing Klein maintaining his silence, he nodded in satisfaction and continued. The families of 2 detectives refused protection, believing that they wouldn't be implicated, so they remained outside. Today, at lunchtime, they were found dead in their respective offices. One was so horrified that he died from fright. The other was too excited that he expanded the last of his energy. They were too stubborn, as expected of believers of the tyrant, but as a result, the mandated punishers have formally involved themselves. It's said that the few churches and the military's high-sequence beyonders have cast their gaze over, and they've placed the matter of the Desire Apostle as one of the most important events in recent times. Are you hoping that I wouldn't reveal your identity as a believer of the God of knowledge and wisdom? Klein asked, seemingly enlightened. It's easy to talk between detectives. Isengard smiled and nodded. No problem. Klein made the promise first, then said, I have some information channels that are convenient to expose. If I get valuable information from them later, I hope you can help me inform the Nighthawks and keep it confidential. As for why it's the Nighthawks instead of the machinery hive mind, he believed that he didn't need to be too clear about it. With the intelligence of a great detective like Stanton, he could easily figure it out. Isengard first agreed to Klein's request, then said in puzzlement, by telling me, it's the same as letting Jason notice it ahead of time. Let's hope we can think of ways of avoiding that. Also, please help me think about other possibilities. That ring of yours should be able to mimic several Beyonder powers, Klein calmly replied. All right. Isengard didn't say anything further. He pondered for a few seconds and took out his pipe to take a whiff. The Desire Apostle's actions today have verified one of my guesses. Heh. It's also the question you thought of previously. His main purpose isn't revenge? Klein understood what Isengard was implying. Isengard leaned forward and solemnly said, since Jason has already been through the cold-blooded stage, it means that he's definitely cold-blooded. It's impossible that he would go this far for that devil. Sherlock, look. Up until now, all of the official Beyonders in Backland have been mobilized, and even the high-sequence Beyonders have shifted their attention to this matter. At this point, if Jason wants to deal with someone else, the true target, wouldn't it be much easier? Klein thought over it for a moment and replied heavily, that makes sense. After a short exchange, Isengard went on to find Kaslana. After Klein tossed the coin, he went out as planned, heading for the Quelag Club. Neither of them had yet revealed their suspicions to the official Beyonders, fearing that it would end up directing harm at Jason, making him detect it and abandon his series of actions. As soon as he entered the Quelag Club, Klein met the surgeon, Aaron, in the lobby. Long time no see, he smiled and greeted him. I've been really busy recently, Aaron replied in a friendly manner, but he maintained his cold expression out of habit. Besides, my wife recently got pregnant, and I'm going to be a father again. Congratulations. When did this happen? Klein asked casually. Aaron thought for a while and said, it was just confirmed. She should be pregnant for more than a month. More than a month? Klein was startled, and then he looked into his eyes. Chapter 423. Wines Arise. Yes, a month or so ago. Aaron nudged his gold-rimmed glasses and gave him a positive answer. A month or so ago. Isn't that when you were being troubled by Will-O-Septon-related nightmares? Klein was surprised and puzzled, but he didn't let his emotions show. In the blink of an eye, he thought of the two divinations he had made. Will-O-Septon was in a dark room with the sound of running water outside. Was that symbolizing amniotic fluid or blood? Klein's heart chilled as he suddenly understood something. When he looked at Dr. Aaron again, he wore a rather complicated look in his eyes. He suspected that his wife was carrying Will-O-Septon, a snake of Mercury. In the symbolism of mysticism, the snake of fate's head and tail are connected, with it devouring its own tail. It implies the cycle of destiny in a hidden manner. In order to avoid his enemy, Will-O-Septon took the initiative to secretly initiate a new cycle in advance? Klein guessed based on what he knew. Dr. Aaron didn't notice the abnormality he was trying hard to hide. He smiled and said, he'll definitely be a cute guy. When he's born, I'll hold a party to celebrate his arrival. Sherlock, don't refuse my invitation when the time comes. Perhaps it's a she, Klein replied with a smile. Frankly speaking, he was curious to see what kind of state the newly born snake of Mercury was in. However, he was also a little afraid and worried. After all, the snake of Mercury was a sequence one of the monster pathway related to fate, and it also involved the fight for the position of being a deity. No one could be sure whether the future would be smooth sailing, with peace and bliss. For Dr. Aaron, I don't know if it was fortune or misfortune. Whether Will Septon is kind is one matter, but whether or not the other snake of Mercury would discover him is another matter. And Will Septon hasn't done anything as of now. Informing the Nighthawks now would seem a little cruel. I've always understood wild beyonders. It's best to just quietly watch from the sidelines and not get involved, or perhaps taking advantage of the situation is the best choice. Maybe I made a mistake in my interpretation and am overthinking things? Perhaps Will Septon isn't a snake of Mercury at all. Perhaps the child Mrs. Aaron is carrying is very normal. Many thoughts flashed through Klein's mind. That's even better, Aaron said in anticipation. After some thought, Klein asked another question. Have you had any nightmares lately? Occasionally, but they were all normal nightmares. There are no longer any nightmares of Will Septon anymore. Sherlock, thank you for your guidance, Aaron said earnestly. No, that makes it abnormal. As a keyboard warrior, my limited general knowledge of psychology tells me that occasionally dreaming of Will Septon would be the natural thing to do. It's a standard response from overstimulation. Since Will had caused you so much trouble and left such a deep impression on you, it would definitely be reflected in your dreams. Therefore, the correct outcome would be to occasionally dream about Will Septon, but the dream wouldn't be too clear, to the point of only knowing that something like that had happened without remembering the details. Klein was pretty sure. At that moment, he heard a rustling sound. He subconsciously looked outside the hall, only to see the darkness in the air being dispersed by a strong wind, and the thin light yellow fog was swept away as a result. The leafless branches swayed back and forth, and the strong gust of wind left a clear trail towards the southeast. A few seconds later, everything returned to normal. It's hard to see such strong winds in Backlund during winter. At least, I don't remember anything like it before. Aaron sighed as he looked out the window. That's not an ordinary wind. What happened? Klein suppressed his curiosity and made an excuse to go to the bathroom to perform a simple divination, but he failed to obtain any effective revelations. He temporarily put this matter to the back of his mind and prepared to head to the underground shooting range to practice his shooting. At that moment, a waiter wearing a red vest came through the warm hall and respectfully said, "Mr. Moriarty, your friend is here for you." "Who?" Klein asked in surprise. "Mr. Akansa Bernard," the red-vested attendant answered. "The deacon who's often forced to perm his hair." "Why is he suddenly looking for me? Have there been any new discoveries?" Klein immediately walked to the reception hall of the club. Akansa pressed down the hat which had been pushed up by his fluffy hair, walked over, and said with a lowered voice, "The mandated punishers have found Jason Patrick Beria." "How was he found?" Klein asked, half surprised, half curious. According to his divination, Jason Beria had always been wearing human skin. His true appearance and aura weren't what they had assumed they were. It was almost impossible for him to be found so easily. Akansa surveyed the area and said, "I'm not sure. I just received the news." He pointed to a small white bird standing on the tree outside the door. The bird was leisurely cleaning its feathers with its beak. Before Klein could ask further, Akansa gave a general account of what had happened. The mandated punishers found clues and confirmed Jason's location. However, the devil discovered the danger in advance and managed to kill 2 mandated punishers and fled before they managed to close in on him. This infuriated the higher-ups of the Church of the Lord of Storms. As such, Spellsinger of God, Ace Snake, is currently personally in pursuit. You likely saw a gust of wind just now. It was caused by him. He's the Archbishop of the Church of the Lord of Storms Backlund Diocese, and he's also one of the cardinals of the Church of the Lord of Storms. It sounds normal, but it also feels weird. According to my theory with Mr. Isengard, this can be also understood as a way for Jason, the Desire Apostle, to draw away high-sequence beyonders. Klein asked after some deliberation, "Are you sure that the person discovered is Jason Beria?" Akansa's expression instantly turned heavy as he replied with an odd tone. "I'll give it a try," he replied in a strange tone. He motioned to Klein to follow him out and into a large carriage parked at the side of the street. There were 2 members of the machinery hive mind inside. Akansa took a deep breath and took out the strange patterned silver mirror from a special pocket in his clothes. After doing the necessary steps, he gloomily said, "Honorable Rhodes, my question is, where is Jason Patrick Beria's current location?" The surrounding lights suddenly warped, as if they were lights after a rain. A scene rapidly surfaced on the silver mirror. It was a riverboat with a sail raised. Jason Beria, with his high cheekbones, blue eyes with a gray tint, and neatly combed hair, pressed down his cap, propped up the collar of his coat, and hurried into the cabin. He's really trying to escape Backlund. Spellsinger of God seems to be heading towards the dock area, a female machinery hive mind member said in realization. That's way too easy for him to be exposed, right? Klein was filled with doubt. Icancer wasn't concerned with any of this. All his attention was placed on the silver mirror's surface. This time, there was only the choice of answering. Answering it wrongly or lying meant suffering a terrifying penalty. Soon words in blood red appeared on the mirror. If the man you like is covered with lumps, has his skin shed, reducing him only to flesh and blood, or has become a monster, but it is still able to communicate with him, will you still like him? What a shameful question. Wait, a man? Klein almost turned his head to look at Icancer. Icancer slowly breathed out and said, I will, but I will kill him with my own hands. Very honest. A new combination of words appeared on the surface of the silver mirror. This question and answer game is simply a public hearing. Klein really wanted to cover his face. He looked at the other two machinery hive mind members and saw no abnormalities from them. Or perhaps, it should be said that they were pretending to not have any abnormal expressions. He hesitantly said, I keep feeling that all of this has been too easy. Perhaps that's not the real Jason Beria? But Jason Beria was directed at him. Icancer was planning to put away the silver mirror. Klein thought for a few seconds and said after organizing his words, No, what I truly mean is that we have to abandon any ingrained judgments. What we are looking for is that desire apostle, not Jason Beria. The two might not necessarily be the same. This is a point that I have to mention as a detective. On King's Avenue, a luxurious carriage left the kingdom's parliament. The carpeted carriage was furnished with a bed, a sofa, a table, and other furniture, like a mobile room. Duke Pallas Negan, who was dressed in a dark blue admiral's uniform, was drinking a polished crystal glass of red wine that resembled crimson blood. As he sampled the wine, he said thoughtfully, Invite Earl Hall to be my guest tomorrow. I would like to discuss with him about increasing the remuneration of the factory workers and improving their working hours, as well as amending the poor law. These are bills he has been pushing hard for recently. He should be very interested. Heh. Why would the Church of the Evernight Goddess suddenly be concerned over such matters? When sending the invitation, you can first inform Earl Hall about the topics I wish to discuss. The property restrictions for the elections are necessary and cannot be lowered. Otherwise, those who are in control of a large number of workers will take up more seats. Also, suppress the recent attack on the invalid voting districts. The secretary at the side quickly scribbled down Duke Negan's orders. After he was done, Duke Negan sighed and said, The reason I'm doing this is also for the sake of the nobles. However, there are more and more useless fellows among us, and there's even quite a number of them who owe money to the tycoons. At that moment, the carriage didn't turn towards Empress Borough but went straight ahead. As the greatest property-owning noble apart from the king, Duke Negan had many mistresses, but in the relatively conservative Lone Kingdom, this was something which would leave him vulnerable to his political enemies. Therefore, even as a noble duke, he still had to sneak around when he went to his mistress's place, but this seemed to only give him more pleasure. Today, he was planning to go to his most beloved mistress of the past 2 to 3 years, a young girl who had just turned 20. Duke Negan took out a bottle of medicine made of mummy powder and drank it. He couldn't help but touch the accessory hanging from his neck. It was a dark blue thumb-sized conch. It was a mystical item that the Church of the Lord of Storms had specially provided after his last assassination attempt by Kalangos. As long as Duke Negan blew on it, the Holy Wind Cathedral Spellsinger of God, Ace Snake would hear it and lock onto his position. In order to protect himself, Duke Negan even moved the residences of his mistresses to areas near the Holy Wind Cathedral. The carriage slowly moved until it reached an extremely luxurious building. At a glance, there was a glass greenhouse filled with bright red roses. Chapter 424. The problem of change inside the carriage outside the Quelag Club. The Desire Apostle might not necessarily be Jason Beria? You believe that we might have been misled? Icancer didn't scoff, show contempt, or think lightly of what Klein had said. Instead, he began to seriously discuss the problem with him. Not a bad deacon. However, it could also be due to him frequently using the magic mirror name Erodes. No matter how bad his temper is, it would eventually be worn out. Klein praised silently and nodded sincerely. This is my personal opinion, derived from a cautious standpoint. It's very easy to prove it again. Ask the magic mirror of the Desire Apostle's location, and not of Jason Beria's location. Ikansa pressed down his hat and said, "Makes sense." His expression turned serious once again, and his gaze landed on the magic mirror in his palm. Deacon Ikansa, if you were to ask for any clues here, the devil will definitely be able to detect it, Klein reminded them. That's right. Ikansa turned his head to the other two members and said, "Continue protecting Mr. Moriarty in secret. Even if the Desire Apostle attacks, the three of you should be able to last for some time. Besides, there's military personnel nearby." "Yes, Deacon." The two Machinery Hive Mind members answered without hesitation. All novelful, Ikansa left at once, heading for where the Nighthawks were, which was around Isengard Stanton. With the Spellsinger of God stirred, and the sealed artifact of the Church of Goddess Church out in force. If the Desire Apostle were to really do anything, it would definitely be this afternoon. Let's hope that there's enough time and that the magic mirror will give him the correct answer. But this way, I won't have a chance to get involved, and I won't be able to personally see the devil that has harmed all of us die, and I won't have access to his suitcase full of money, gold bars, gold coins and jewelry. Klein looked at the Ikansers departing back and sighed in disappointment. However, his mood soon recovered. That's good too. At the very least I won't have to take any risks and be able to safely get out of this predicament. Furthermore, the Machinery Hive Mind definitely won't treat me unfairly. If I were to succeed, my opinions and suggestions definitely would have played an important role. Furthermore, I'm a believer of the god of steam and machinery, so it's likely I'll receive some of the spoils. Considering the premise of £50,000, it shouldn't be too small. Klein couldn't help but feel a bit regretful as he thought of this. But he wouldn't risk himself by getting involved. A magician never performs unprepared. It happened too quickly and hastily, without giving me any time to plan at all. Klein nodded at the two Machinery Hive Mind members, got out of the carriage, and returned to the Quelag Club, where he had no trouble getting the attendant to allocate him a break room. Hillston Burrow. In Isengard Stanton's living room. Leonard Mitchell combed some of his slightly unruly black hair. In accordance with Captain Soast's instructions and the help of the other Nighthawks, he barely managed to put on the silver armor, which was stained with large amounts of blood. He pulled down his visor and hid his green eyes in the darkness. Then he extended his left hand, which was covered by a silver metal gauntlet, and held the magic mirror Ikansa handed him. Within the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery, the code name of the silver mirror was 2-111. It's only a grade 2 sealed artifact? Soast asked, slightly surprised. Ikansa nodded. Yes, it's not that dangerous. As he said that, he suddenly sounded like he was gritting his teeth. That is to say that its other aspects have reached the standards of a grade 1 sealed artifact? Soast asked in thought. Ikansa warily glanced at him. Only in certain aspects. He refused to divulge any more information. At this moment, Leonard used his right hand to gently stroke the surface of the silver mirror. The living room suddenly became quiet. After repeating it 3 times, he said in a deep voice, "Honorable Rhodes, my question is, where is the current location of the Desire Apostle who assaulted Isengard Stanton?" The entire house turned dark as though a dark cloud had passed by. The surface of the silver mirror glowed with an aqueous light, and a blurry image quickly formed. It was a luxurious villa with a large garden in front of the window. In the center of the garden, there was a glass greenhouse, with bright red roses blooming inside. Above the glass greenhouse, the pale sun could still be seen behind the thin fog. It's in Backlund. Isengard Stanton immediately derived the location of the scene based on the angle of the view and the position of the sun in the sky. This is completely different from the answer when we asked about Jason Beria. We've been tricked. Ikansa said in a deep voice. Solashura Soast exhaled and said, "How crafty. Then, who's the Jason Beria that Spellsinger of God is chasing?" Sigh, there's no time for discussion. We need to narrow down the general location of the presented scene. Then, we'll immediately take action. I suspect that the Desire Apostle is planning to cause a huge incident. At this point, the silver mirror known as a Rhodes had dissipated the scene, replacing it with words. It required Leonard Mitchell to answer a question, and if he lied or refused to answer, he would be severely punished. For some baffling reason, Leonard felt a little nervous. He put away his usual frivolous attitude and quietly waited for the question. A few seconds later, he saw the blood-red words change, taking shape one by one. On your body, is there something attached? Halfway through the question, Leonard's pupils rapidly contracted. His back tensed up, and a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. If it wasn't for him being concealed by the blood-stained silver armor, the others would have already noticed his abnormality. Right at this moment, his left palm inexplicably trembled. The silver magic mirror suddenly trembled, and the scarlet words were strangely tainted with a tint of green. If one didn't keep staring at the mirror with rapt attention, it would be difficult for others to discover that the color of the mirror had slightly changed. The words continued warping, changing the question to, on your body, is there a scar which you cannot tell others? Yes, that scar resides in my memory, Leonard answered stably, but his body inside the blood-stained silver armor felt a sense of exhaustion from suddenly relaxing a high tension. This mirror is too dangerous. It actually noticed it. Thankfully, old man has recovered a bit after such a long time. He thought. His lips were dry. Soas took out his pocket watch, pressed it open to take a look, and said to Leonard, who was inside the blood-stained silver armor. There's still time. You'll be in charge of the rest of the operation. Yes, Captain Soast. Leonard let out a secret sigh. Dock area. Backlund shipyard. Patrick Jason Beria entered a cabin he had reserved in advance. He looked out of the window and observed the sky filled with fog as he silently counted the time. After a while, he quickly took off his hat and clothes. Then, with a tug of his hand, he pulled off the outer layer of human skin. Under the human skin was a beautiful woman in her early 30s with a profound look in her eyes. She wasn't the man with brown hair and brown eyes whom Klein had seen during the dream divination. The woman took out some clothes and put them on methodically, quickly becoming an absolutely charming woman. Finally, she pulled out a fist-sized stone figurine from the bottom of a suitcase and wrapped it tightly with the peeled-off skin before tying a dead knot. Having done all this, the riverboat was already some distance away. She opened the window and threw Patrick Jason's skin along with the stone figurine into the river. Plop! The human skin that was tied to the heavy object quickly sank. The woman clapped her hands and closed the window. Carrying the suitcase, she changed to a different cabin she had prepared. Then she sat down at the window of the new cabin, propped up her elbows, her face in her hands, and looked out leisurely. After an unknown period of time, she saw a strong gust of wind blowing in the air, dispersing the thin fog. The corners of her lips curled up into a brilliant smile. In a luxurious villa not far from the Holy Wind Cathedral in Sherwood Borough. The bloated blue-eyed Palace Negan bear hugged his approaching mistress, a beautiful young girl with a bit of innocence on her face. There were two people following him. One of them was a middle-aged man wearing a black tailcoat. He had brown hair and blue eyes, but he didn't wear an expression. He was a beyonder guard provided by the Church of the Lord of Storms, a Sequence 6 wind-blessed. The other person was Duke Negan's secretary. He was a thin blonde young man with delicate features, looking refined and reserved. His biggest flaw was his receding hairline which didn't match his age. As for the other guards or security personnel, they were spread out outside the house. On the second floor, the wind-blessed entered the bedroom before Duke Negan for a quick inspection. Meanwhile, Duke Negan's secretary was in charge of searching the surrounding rooms. After confirming that there were no problems, they nodded at Duke Negan, indicating that he could continue. My roused-up feelings have almost calmed down, Duke Negan said half-jokingly. His mistress happily responded, then we can have a nice chat. I'd like to hear about your time at sea. I hope you'll eventually have the energy to do so. Duke Negan carried his mistress into the bedroom and closed the door behind him with his heel. His secretary and the wind-blessed entered the rooms on either side of him, not relaxing in the slightest. In the attic of this house, a man in a dark overcoat sat on an old chair, his eyes half closed. It was unknown what he was trying to sense, but he would occasionally smile and shake his head. His brown hair was slightly curled, and his brown eyes were cold. It was the same person that Klein had seen in the dream divination. The difference was that there was one fewer suitcase by his feet. How vigorous, and what intense desire. This doesn't match my judgment of him. It looks like he took some medicine. That just works so well for me. Haha, How could they possibly imagine that Patrick Jason Beria is actually two people? The man tilted his face up slightly as if he was intoxicated. It's almost time. Right now. His right hand suddenly clenched, as if he was tightly clutching someone's heart. Chapter 425. Under the roses beyond the window, the glass greenhouse reflected the pale light of the sun, and the bright roses stood out even in the thin fog. In the bedroom, Duke Negan seemed to have recovered the feeling of following his father and elders around the vast lands when he was young, riding a horse, using a hound, and chasing a wild beast. Finally, he climaxed and the surroundings seemed to become abnormally quiet. At this moment, his mind suddenly buzzed once. He felt as if the pleasure and comfort he was feeling had suddenly exploded one after another. It continued exploding without end or limit, again and again. Duke Negan's waist kept shaking, and his eyes were blank, his brain having lost its train of thought. His heart began to beat violently in an unbearable manner, like a steam boiler whose pressure had gone beyond its limits. It could blow up at any time, and hot steam could gush out at any moment. If it were an ordinary person or a beyonder who wasn't physically strong, they would have suffered a heart attack, a massive cerebral hemorrhage, and die on the spot. But Duke Negan ultimately managed to ride through the attack. Only his eyes were unfocused, and saliva was flowing out the corner of his mouth before he weakly slumped onto his mistress. The wind blessed and the Duke's secretary, who were on guard on both sides of the room, simultaneously sensed the strange and mysterious smell of spirituality. The former's body was suddenly surrounded by a violent wind, sweeping him towards the wall, and with a clang, a large hole was blown through the wall as he stepped into the bedroom. The secretary went straight to the source of the mystery, the attic of the house. Along the way, he didn't evade or dodge, but the decorative vases and other objects in the corridor seemed to have found lives of their own and avoided him in ingenious ways. As he ran up the stairs to the attic, the wooden floorboards seemed to rise, as if to give him a hand. In just 3 or 4 seconds, the refined, handsome, blonde young man entered the attic and saw a figure sitting on an old chair. The figure was covered in a thick black liquid, just like the gathering of all the ugly desires and intense feelings in the depths of a human's heart. It was the greed of willing to sell and hang oneself by the ropes, the hunger that wouldn't even spare one's own kind, and a lust without limits. This was a devil walking the earth. The skinny secretary's expression didn't change, nor did he attack directly. Instead, he looked at the other party, reached behind him, and politely closed the door. Bam! The wooden door of the attic was closed. The entire room suddenly felt like it had been completely sealed, as if one could never leave the room unless effort was put in to crack the seal. At this moment, the concept of closing the door and sealing the room seemed to have been changed to seal this place, isolate the outside from the inside. The Desire Apostle moved. His body expanded and grew a pair of huge bat wings that emitted light blue tongues of flames. One by one, fireballs that exuded a strong sulfurous smell were formed, and they bombarded Duke Negan's blonde secretary. The secretary reached out with his white-gloved left hand and clenched it while half-turning his wrist. Boom! 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 The fireballs stopped following the principle of straight or parabolic paths as they scattered in every direction in a sudden outburst of chaos, like the irregular movement of tiny particles suggested by a botanist. Some of them hit the wall, some hit the ceiling, some fell beside the weak-looking secretary, and some fell backward, almost wounding the Desire Apostle himself. The entire attic was a mess, with traces of destruction and char everywhere, and the house even shook a few times. However, the mysterious power that was sealed in here, or the rules that had been tampered with, had yet been destroyed. The surrounding walls, the old wooden door, and the dusty roof appeared to be on the verge of collapsing, but it remained intact. The Desire Apostle wasn't frustrated by the failure of his previous attempt, nor was he flustered that he couldn't control his enemy or catalyze him into a frenzy, due to his calmness and restrained desires. His coffee-brown eyes suddenly lit up like lava as he took the form of the blonde secretary. He spat out a word in the devil language, one filled with foulness and filth. Die! Almost at the same time, the pupils under the secretary's golden-rimmed glasses constricted. He opened his left fist and aimed at the Desire Apostle with the palm of his hand. Suddenly, his figure split into two. One was refined and skinny like his actual self. The other was a shadow covered by a black liquid of desire. The two quickly alternated, overlapping with each other at times. Die! The word said in the language of foulness echoed in the attic as the secretary let out a low grunt and took 2 steps back. Following that, the split silhouette dissipated, and large swaths of rusted red marks appeared on his face, as though he had turned into a man of iron that had been left in a humid area for years. Cough, cough, cough. He coughed violently, spitting out blobs of rusted blood that had congealed into clumps. The marks on his body began to slowly peel off. Cough, cough, cough. The Desire Apostle was also coughing out blood that had clumped and turned to rust. The viscous black liquid covering his entire body suddenly became much thinner. The language of foulness seemed to have half of its effects transferred to him by Duke Negan's secretary. In the bedroom, the Wind-Blessed helped Duke Negan up and kicked the beautiful mistress to the other side in case she was an accomplice of the assailant. The reason why he didn't help the secretary was because he knew he had only one responsibility: to protect Duke Negan. And in similar situations, one had to be wary of more than one enemy. At this point, Duke Negan had somewhat recovered a little. He was rather strong, but his limbs still felt weak. His body felt empty and his mind was sluggish. He was completely unable to use his Beyonder powers. He motioned to the Wind-Blessed to remove the conch necklace from his neck and brought the item to his lips. Duke Negan took a deep breath and blew into the small conch, which was covered in strange patterns. Splash! The low and deep sound of the tide was heard as it rushed towards the Holy Wind Cathedral. With his Grace's speed, he should be able to arrive very soon. The Wind-Blessed first reassured him, and then with Duke Negan on his back, he went to the window and leaped down. He wanted to meet up with the Duke's guards outside. There were 2 or 3 low-sequence Beyonders among them. Duke Negan gasped for breath and said, "Catch him, make sure to catch him alive, or with a spirit body. I want to know who it is." He had suffered an assassination attempt from Pirate Admiral Kalangos the last time, and now, it was an unknown Sequence 5 expert. Duke Negan was very aware that he hadn't developed any irredeemable grudges with anyone recently. As such, he was especially angry and resentful. He wanted to find the mastermind and use all the resources at his disposal to tear the mastermind apart. The premise of all this was that he could find clues from the assassin. 7 or 8 seconds later, most of the Duke's guards surged forward, surrounding Palace Negan and the Wind-Blessed in the middle as they gathered in front of the garden. "Wait here and be on guard against the enemy," the Wind-Blessed gave the order. Under normal circumstances, he had to protect the Duke and evacuate from the assassination grounds as quickly as possible and rush to the safety of the Holy Wind Cathedral. However, he wasn't sure if there were any other enemies, and he was afraid of being ambushed en route. He was afraid of missing the reinforcements from Spellsinger of God, Ace Snake, and ending up being placed in a more perilous situation. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Time kept flowing by as the house shook from time to time, and the battle inside seemed to have reached its climax. "Why is the Archbishop not here yet?" the panting Duke Negan asked in a slightly panicked voice. With the Archbishop's flying speed, he should have arrived very quickly. However, there weren't any signs of the thin fog being scattered in the direction of the Holy Wind Cathedral. On high alert, the Wind-Blessed hesitantly said, Perhaps the Archbishop. He eventually failed to mention the possibility that the Archbishop wasn't in the Holy Wind Cathedral. At that moment, the beautiful mistress of Duke Negan came to the window of the bedroom on the 2nd floor. Her eyes filled with a lost and beautiful smile. Then, she jumped down, deliberately hitting her head on the concrete floor. Bam! After producing a jarring sound, there were quite a few cracks on her beautiful head, and blood began to flow out. She rolled a few times, weakly, until she was facing up. Her eyes had lost all focus, and her frozen expression was one of madness and fear. Seeing this scene, many members of the Duke's guards couldn't help but feel horrified. Even Duke Negan himself felt that his emotions were on the verge of collapse when Archbishop Snake didn't arrive. "Let's go! Let's get out of here!" he weakly called out on instinct. Just as the Wind-Blessed was rejoicing over not being soft-hearted when kicking the mistress away, otherwise the Duke would have been killed on the spot, he heard a command filled with horror. His heart suddenly skipped a beat. Inside the attic, the Desire Apostle, who was in the middle of a fierce battle, suddenly liquefied and turned into countless black shadows, jumping up and down on the ground. After dodging the blonde secretary's attack, he rematerialized in another direction. Then, he looked at the enemy, raised his right arm, and slightly curled the corners of his mouth. "No!" The blonde secretary's eyes reddened. All of a sudden, the Desire Apostle clenched his fist. Outside the luxurious house, Duke Negan's horror erupted. It shot straight to his brain and into his veins, blanketing all his nerves. He heard the sound of something shattering and felt a warm sensation at the back of his head. At the same time, several members of the Duke's guards became flustered and panicked. They all raised their custom revolvers or rifles in their hands and started shooting randomly towards the center. Bang! 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 The Wind-Blessed was the first to reach out and grab Duke Negan. He rolled to the ground, and a formless wind as sharp as knives appeared out of thin air, slicing through the throats of the guards. Splat! Splat! The guards clutched at their throats, slowly falling to the ground in a pool of fresh blood. Duke Negan's body twitched a few times, but then it stopped moving. He was robbed of his life by his own horror. If he hadn't been a Sequence 6 Beyonder, then his horror might have even dismembered him. Of course, if he hadn't become extremely weak, then he wouldn't have possessed such intense emotions. And even if he had these emotions, then he wouldn't have directly died as a result of this. But there were no ifs in this world. Palace Negan, the leader of the Conservative Party, the noble with the largest land apart from the king, the elder brother of the current prime minister, a Sequence 6 Beyonder, and a truly important figure, was dead. The roses in the nearby glass greenhouse were still in full bloom. In the attic, the blonde secretary seemed to sense something and could no longer control his emotions. As a result, his mind went blank, and he anxiously ran outside, automatically opening the door to the sealed room. 2 seconds later, he snapped to his senses and turned around again. However, the figure that was covered by the black liquid and the suitcase in the corner had disappeared. The Desire Apostle quickly left the villa, evacuating from the scene based on a predetermined route. It was at this moment that a thick sea of blood seemed to appear before his eyes. Chapter 426. 1-42. The Desire Apostle, who had once worn Patrick Jason's skin, stopped in his tracks and looked around in bewilderment. Only now did he vaguely realize that danger was approaching. He was at the edge of a garden where the grass had withered due to winter and was revealing dark brown soil. On the right side of the street, there weren't many pedestrians on the weekday afternoon. At this moment, there were only a few people passing by, but they didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. Suddenly, a silver glint appeared in the eyes of the Desire Apostle, and a person decked out in full body armor emerged from the other side of the garden. All novel full. The armor was stained with congealed blood, diagonally from its left shoulder all the way down. It exuded a bewitching beauty and appeared to be extremely heavy. Every step it took slightly shook the ground. Upon seeing this blood-stained silver armor, the Desire Apostle felt as if he couldn't breathe properly, as if he had met his most terrifying nemesis. How are they here so quickly? They saw through my ruse so quickly? The Desire Apostle regained his calm and cold-bloodedness, fully focused on sensing the emotions and desires of the Beyonder inside the blood-stained silver armor. However, to his despair, the silver armor completely blocked his Beyonder powers. It was as if he had touched a rock, a piece of cold armor which had no one in it. The Desire Apostle had no choice but to raise his right hand, spreading out his giant bat wings and bringing with it some blue flames that rapidly condensed. At that moment, a silver light flashed from his right palm, and his thumb fell to the ground. The wound was extremely clean. Amidst swooshing sounds and a flash of silver light, the remaining 9 fingers of the Desire Apostle were severed. The suitcase he was carrying also fell to the ground with a thud. The Desire Apostle's pupils immediately contracted to a needlepoint, and he flapped the pair of huge bat wings on his back to escape in another direction. The shadow under his feet shrank back without anyone realizing it, hiding in one spot. The Desire Apostle had only taken 2 steps when countless silver lights burst out from his body like blooming fireworks. The thick black liquid that covered his body splashed to the ground like raindrops. His forearm, arm, shoulders, ribs, neck, and other parts of his body broke off and smoothly slid downwards. Splat! 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 The pale, blood-stained intestines of the Desire Apostle splashed to the ground, along with his squirming stomach and his beating heart which had yet to cease. The place where he stood was where the blood was the thickest. The further he went, the more splat it looked, which when put together, they formed a beautiful flower of death. A Sequence 5 expert, a Desire Apostle who had just completed an impossible assassination, was dismembered without any resistance. This was a Grade 1 sealed artifact. This was the sealed artifact that had caused over 100,000 people to lose their lives. Sealed Artifact 1-42. Dressed in that terrifying-looking armor, Leonard Mitchell struggled to take 2 steps forward, sized up the dismembered body on the ground, and raised his voice. "He's not completely dead yet." He paused for a moment and then added, "Different devils have different characteristics. This Desire Apostle is a shadow shifter. He's just abandoned his own body, only leaving a shadow behind." While Solashur Soist instructed a number of Nighthawks and members of the machinery hive mind to keep ordinary people at bay, he surveyed the scene and listened to Leonard. He took out his pocket watch and opened it. He asked with a serious expression, "There's only 10 minutes left, is it enough?" "Don't force it." "No problem." 1-42 has locked onto him. "I can sense its excitement," Leonard said without hesitation. Sois spread his red-gloved fingers and said to the other Nighthawks, "Bring hot water with you and follow Leonard closely. Once there are any problem, switch with him immediately and dig a bathtub on the spot. Also leave marks. The other team members and I will quickly catch up." Tap, tap, tap. The blood-stained silver armor began running in pursuit. Despite looking heavy, it was incredulously fast. Soist watched as the few red gloves left before turning to look at a cancer. "Deacon Bernard, take the rest of the machinery hive mind members to that house. Watch the Duke's guards and anyone else that's alive at the scene." "Watch." Icancer subconsciously returned with a question. Soist nodded seriously and said, "How can the Desire Apostle be able to determine that the Duke would be coming to this house today, to the point of precisely pinpointing the time, and then perfectly luring the Spellzinger of God away?" Icancer was instantly enlightened. "Are you saying that a member of the Duke's guards or someone trusted by him is a partner of the Desire Apostle? Otherwise, there was no way that his timing could be that perfect. The so-called operation wouldn't have any chance of success otherwise. It can only be said that this is the most probable cause. We cannot eliminate the assumption that the Desire Apostle has a powerful clairvoyant." Soist didn't continue as he led a second batch of Nighthawks and followed the marks to reinforce the teammates up ahead. With a calm face, he led the rest of the machinery hive mind back to the house of the Duke's mistress. He looked up at the pale sun behind the thin fog and knew that the situation in the whole of Backland, and even the whole of the Lone Kingdom, or even the world would change because of what had happened today. In the darkness of the sewers, a shadow was advancing rapidly in a particular direction while clinging to the bottom of the stone wall. He wanted to take advantage of the fact that the blood-stained armor was tall and heavy, making it inconvenient for him to move around in certain narrow areas of the sewers, thus allowing him to shake him off his tail. Every time the shadow moved a certain distance forward, it would stop, frozen in place. His pitch-black surface continued to swell and solidify as if it was trying to produce new flesh and blood, but due to a lack of materials, it failed miserably. The Desire Apostle let out a painful gasp, feeling that he could lose control at any moment in this state. After a short breather, he continued to run for his life, unable to afford the time to decrease the threat of the problem he faced. He was also afraid that the terrifying blood-stained silver armor would silently catch up with him. At the Quelag Club, Klein entered the lounge and took the newspapers to the toilet. He was afraid that the Desire Apostle would flee in advance, leaving potential danger for himself, Isengard Stanton, Kaslana, and the innocent private detectives. Therefore, he planned on heading above the grey fog to perform another divination to confirm the Desire Apostle's present situation and, thus, adopt a targeted strategy. After repeating the previous process of replacing himself with a paper figurine, he sat in the seat of the fool, conjuring Jason Beria's handkerchief and trying to divine his current location. In the dusky dream world, Klein saw the dark sewers. He saw a living shadow and how his body seemingly appeared to fill itself with flesh and blood, only to constantly fail, as well as tiny black dust that kept being shed from his body. The scene climbed higher and arrived above ground, revealing a towering cathedral. Holy Wind Cathedral. Klein opened his closed eyes and understood the situation of the Desire Apostle. He hasn't been caught yet, but he seems to be heavily injured. His condition is in terrible shape and it's filled with abnormalities. His suitcase is gone too. It must have been dropped when he was injured. Klein thought for a moment. Using divination, he recalled the map of Backland and made it appear before his eyes. Similarly, he came up with a rough layout of Backland's sewers. Having previously made full use of the sewer system, He had always been gathering similar information such as this. The main focus was on East Borough, the Backlund Bridge area, and the area where he was located in, Sherwood Backlund. After some hard work, he had long completed the first stage of his plan of understanding the main layout of the sewer network. To have a more in-depth understanding of it would require an extremely long period of persistence. When the time came, Klein even thought of infiltrating Backlund's municipal hall and directly sneak a peek at the design prints. According to the two maps and the scene seen in the dream divination, Klein noticed that the Desire Apostle Beria hadn't fled in the direction of the Tussock River. Instead, he had taken the opposite route to Hillston Borough, as if he wanted to pass through and enter the artificial lake in Empress Borough. In other words, he's getting closer and closer to me. Klein's mind stirred as he suddenly had an idea. Although I'm not sure which sewer he'll pass through, I can make a judgment via divination. He's heavily injured and in a very strange state. His interference in this aspect has turned extremely weak. At close distances, it's not like I can't find him. After all, I've seen what he really looks like, and I have a grasp of his aura. When it comes to finding people, I'm a professional. I have to do something. I can't let him escape just like that. There's still time. After confirming the degree of danger, Klein made up his mind and returned to the real world. He took out the candle, quickly set up a ritual, summoned himself, and responded to himself. Not long after, there was a figure in black armor, wearing a black crown, and a cloak of the same color in the bathroom. It was Klein in his spirit body state while carrying the Dark Emperor card. He also included mystical items such as the sun brooch and biological poison bottle, so as to ensure success. Then, he disappeared into the air and left the Quelag Club in another direction. The current Klein could fly, so he was very fast, but he couldn't cause any wind, because he was a spirit body. He scraped past a tree and took away a dead branch. Having seen Jason Beria's actual appearance before, together with his own memory and the handkerchief as a medium, Klein, combined with the layout map and the dowsing rod divination, quickly determined the sewer areas that Jason had passed. After entering the pitch-black and fetid area, Klein used his maximum speed to pass through a large number of narrow areas and entered a relatively spacious area. The dark river flowed, and a mixed smell filled the air. He would occasionally change his direction and chase after Jason Beria. The Desire Apostle nearly lost control again. He stopped and pressed himself against the damp walls and cold pipes, trying hard to rein in his bloodlust and his desire to kill. Pant, pant. The thin shadow started to move. At this moment, he suddenly turned his head to look at the spot he had just passed. The pitch-black armor and the black crown first entered his eyes, outlining an extremely imposing figure. Behind the figure, the weightless cloak lightly swayed as he moved forward. It's nearby. A body of heavy silver armor stained in blood went through the entrance and climbed down to the sewers. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.